At my wife's company's party, my wife mocked me. Her female boss slipped me a card and whispered, "Call me if you want a woman who values you." My wife's face when she saw her hand on my shoulder, unforgettable. I should have known the night was doomed the moment Melissa started having a full-blown conversation with her reflection in our bedroom mirror. And honestly, the mirror was getting more attention than I'd gotten all week. She was standing there in her sleek black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my first car, adjusting her diamond earrings with the precision of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery, while I sat on the edge of our bed wondering if I should just start introducing myself to people as Melissa's plus one, to save everyone the awkward confusion. Tonight was her night, and she'd made that abundantly clear about 17 times since breakfast. She was a senior researcher at Pharmatech Solutions, some fancy pharmaceutical company that threw an annual gala every year where everyone pretended to care about scientific breakthroughs while actually just networking and getting hammered on free champagne. The whole event was basically LinkedIn come to life, except with better lighting and worse conversations. And me? Well, I was cast in the critically acclaimed role of supportive husband, which is corporate speak for a human coat rack who occasionally nods and smiles on command. "Try to blend in tonight, Aaron," Melissa said without even turning away from her mirror, like she was giving instructions to a poorly trained puppy. Her tone had that special quality that made it sound less like a suggestion and more like a threat wrapped in expensive perfume. "Sure thing," I replied, straightening my tie that suddenly felt like a noose. "Should I also work on my invisibility skills? Or is that something that'll just happen naturally once we walk through those doors?" I was aiming for humor, maybe a little laugh to cut through the tension that had been building in our house like smog over Los Angeles. She didn't laugh. Of course she didn't laugh. Melissa had stopped finding me funny approximately around the same time she got promoted to her current position, which coincidentally was also when she started referring to Casual Friday as inappropriate workplace culture. Humor, apparently, didn't fit into her carefully curated executive aura, which was something she'd actually said out loud to me last month without a trace of irony. I'd laughed then too. She hadn't. The ballroom at the Grand Meridian Hotel looked exactly like what would happen if a luxury perfume commercial had a baby with a corporate training video, and that baby grew up to have really expensive taste and no personality. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, casting this weird golden glow over everything that made everyone look either ethereally beautiful or slightly jaundiced, depending on your blood alcohol level. Round tables covered in white linens dotted the space like islands in a sea of polished marble floors, and everywhere you looked, there were people in designer suits and dresses pretending that small talk was an Olympic sport they were all competing in. The second we crossed the threshold into that ballroom, I watched my wife transform right before my eyes, like Clark Kent ducking into a phone booth, except instead of becoming Superman, she became corporate Barbie with a master's degree and an attitude problem. It was honestly impressive how fast she could flip that switch. One second she was Melissa, my wife of 7 years who still had that little snort when she laughed really hard. The next second she was Dr. Melissa Clark, senior research scientist, complete with the power handshake, the manufactured laughter that sounded like it came from a can, and the ability to say, "Oh my gosh, your presentation on protein inhibitors was absolutely life-changing," without visibly gagging. I followed behind her like a lost puppy as she worked the room, watching her float from group to group with the grace of someone who'd been practicing this dance for years. She'd lean in conspiratorially with Dr. Sanders from oncology research, throw her head back in exaggerated amusement at something Dr. Patel said about enzyme reactions, and air-kiss people she'd spent the last 3 months complaining about during our sad dinner for 2 nights at home. It was a masterclass in professional fakery, and I had front-row seats to the show. When she finally got around to introducing me to people, which happened with about as much enthusiasm as someone showing off a moderately interesting houseplant, it went something like this. "Oh, and this is my husband, Aaron. He does something with logistics." She'd wave her hand vaguely in my direction like she was gesturing toward a piece of furniture she couldn't quite remember buying, and then immediately pivot back to whoever she was trying to impress, leaving me standing there like a game show contestant who'd just lost in the first round. Something with logistics. That's how she described my career. Never mind that I owned and operated a successful logistics optimization firm that specialized in pharmaceutical supply chain management. Never mind that I'd spent the last 8 years building a business from scratch that now employed 15 people and had contracts with 3 major companies. Never mind that I probably understood the technical side of getting their precious drugs from point A to point B better than half the people in this room. Nope. I was just Aaron, the guy who does something with logistics, like I was some kind of mystery animal at a petting zoo that nobody should feed after midnight or get wet. By the third introduction, the pattern had become painfully clear, and I'd come to the sobering realization that I was basically her handbag, except less fashionable and with more feelings that could get hurt. I was an accessory, a prop, a barely sentient piece of arm candy that she'd brought along, because showing up solo to these things apparently sent the wrong message about work-life balance or whatever corporate buzzword was trending this quarter. Every single time I tried to contribute something meaningful to a conversation, something that might remind these people that I had a functioning brain and relevant expertise, Melissa would swoop in like a conversational sniper and take me out with surgical precision. Dr. Perez, this intense-looking guy with salt and pepper hair and glasses that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, mentioned that they were having supply chain issues with their new drug rollout. My ears perked up because, hey, this was literally what I did for a living. This was my moment. Funny enough, that's actually my area of expertise. I started, feeling a little spark of hope that maybe I could contribute something valuable to this evening beyond just my presence. I've dealt with similar distribution challenges, and there are some strategies involving. Aaron, sweetheart. Melissa cut me off with the warmth of a Canadian winter, placing her hand on my arm with just enough pressure to communicate that I should shut up immediately. Could you be a dear and grab me a Chardonnay? I'm absolutely parched. Her smile was plastic fantastic, all teeth and zero sincerity, and her eyes had that special glint that said we'd be having words about this later. Sure, why not? I absolutely loved being publicly demoted from successful business owner to glorified bartender in front of a room full of people who probably already thought I was Melissa's charity case. Nothing says healthy marriage quite like being treated like the help at a party where you're supposed to be a guest. I nodded, smiled my best, yes dear smile, and headed toward the bar, feeling the weight of my dignity crumbling like a stale cookie in my pocket. The bartender was this college-aged kid with a man bun and a vest that was trying way too hard to look sophisticated. He caught my eye as I approached, and I swear I saw a flicker of recognition there, like we were both members of the same sad club. He gave me this look that said, "Hang in there, bro. We've all been there." And I appreciated the solidarity, even if it came from someone who was probably serving drinks to pay for his philosophy degree. "Rough night?" he asked, already reaching for a wine glass because apparently my misery was that obvious. "I'm just doing my internship in humiliation studies," I told him, leaning against the bar. "Pretty sure I'm about to graduate with honors." He chuckled and poured a generous glass of Chardonnay. "On the house, man. You look like you need it more than she does." I grabbed the wine and made my way back through the crowd, weaving between conversations about clinical trials and FDA approvals and drug efficacy rates. All topics I actually found interesting, but apparently wasn't qualified to discuss in my wife's presence. When I found Melissa again, she was deep in conversation with 3 other researchers, their heads bent together like they were plotting world domination or at least the next quarterly report. I held out the wine glass. She didn't even look up. Just reached out with one perfectly manicured hand, took the glass from me like I was a waiter she couldn't be bothered to acknowledge, and kept talking to her colleagues about protein synthesis or enzyme inhibitors or something that probably would have fascinated me if I wasn't busy having an existential crisis about my marriage. I stood there for a moment, hovering awkwardly at the edge of their circle, waiting for an acknowledgement that never came, before finally accepting that I was just part of the scenery and wandering off to find somewhere else to exist. At that point, even the wait staff was starting to feel sorry for me. This young waiter with kind eyes and a tray of canapes actually stopped next to me and whispered, "Sir, would you like me to accidentally spill something on her dress? I'm very good at making things look accidental." His face was completely serious, like he was genuinely offering this service as part of his duties. I actually smiled for the first time all evening. "That's incredibly tempting," I told him honestly, "but no thanks." She already spilled enough on me tonight, and that was purely emotional, so we're probably at our quota for ruined things. He nodded sympathetically and moved on, leaving me standing alone in a ballroom full of people, feeling more invisible than I'd ever felt in my entire life, and wondering at what exact point my marriage had turned into whatever this sad performance was supposed to be. By the time we hit the third round of introductions, I'd fully accepted my new role in life as Melissa's designer handbag, except handbags probably got more respect and definitely didn't have to deal with the emotional whiplash of being married to someone who treated them like an embarrassing tattoo she got in college. At least a purse had a clear purpose and didn't have to stand there pretending to be interested in conversations it wasn't allowed to participate in. I was starting to think those luxury brands had the right idea, just hanging there silently looking expensive without having to contribute opinions or, God forbid, demonstrate actual knowledge about anything. The pattern had become so predictable I could have written a manual on it. Step 1. Melissa approaches a group of colleagues. Step 2. She laughs at something that's not funny and compliments someone's research that she probably hasn't even read. Step 3. Someone acknowledges my existence, usually with a polite, "And you are?" Step 4. Melissa introduces me with all the enthusiasm of someone describing a minor medical condition. Step 5. I'm immediately forgotten, or worse, I try to speak and get shut down faster than a sketchy website on a work computer. Dr. Perez showed up again, this time with his wife Linda, who seemed like an actual human being with a personality, which was refreshing in this sea of corporate robots. They were discussing the nightmare of getting temperature-sensitive medications to rural clinics without the whole batch going bad in transit, which was literally the kind of problem I solved for a living. This was my bread and butter, my wheelhouse, my entire professional jam. I knew the answer to this problem. I'd solved this exact issue for 2 different clients in the past 18 months. The challenge is maintaining the cold chain integrity during the last-mile delivery, Dr. Perez was saying, running his hand through his hair in frustration. We've lost 3 shipments this quarter alone. It's a logistics nightmare. My brain lit up like a Christmas tree. This was it. This was my moment to actually contribute something valuable, to show these people that I wasn't just some random dude who'd wandered in off the street because the hors d'oeuvres looked good. I opened my mouth, ready to explain the innovative IoT temperature monitoring system we'd implemented that solved this exact problem, complete with real-time alerts and automated rerouting protocols. Actually, that's exactly what I specialize in. I started feeling a genuine rush of enthusiasm for the first time all night. We've developed a system that uses Aaron, sweetheart. Melissa's voice cut through my sentence like a knife through butter, except less useful and more annoying. Her hand landed on my arm with the grip of someone who was definitely going to have words with me later in the car. Could you be absolutely wonderful and grab me another Chardonnay? This one's gotten warm. She held out her still half-full glass with a smile that would have fooled everyone except me and possibly Linda, who I caught giving Melissa a side-eye that could have stripped paint. Sure. Absolutely. Why would I want to discuss my actual area of expertise when I could instead fulfill my true calling as a mobile beverage delivery service? I took the glass, noting that it was actually still pretty cold, and headed back to the bar for the second time in 20 minutes, feeling my soul slowly leak out through my shoes with each step. The bartender with the man bun saw me coming and actually grimaced in sympathy. Back already? Dude, you okay? Living the dream, I told him, sliding the glass across the bar. The dream where you show up to school naked and everyone's laughing at you. Except it's real life and everyone's just politely pretending you don't exist. He poured a fresh glass, and this time he added what looked like an extra generous pour. My girlfriend treats her laptop better than your wife treats you, and she spilled coffee on it last week. Don't worry, I said, grabbing the wine. I'm building character. We're having a breakdown. Honestly, at this point, it could go either way. I returned with the wine, performing my duties as the world's most educated drinks waiter, and this time I didn't even bother trying to insert myself into the conversation. I just handed Melissa the glass and stood there like a potted plant. Except potted plants probably added more to the ambience and didn't have to deal with the crushing realization that their spouse saw them as nothing more than a convenient accessory. She took the wine without even a glance in my direction, didn't say thank you, didn't acknowledge the favor, just seamlessly continued her conversation about grant funding and research protocols while I stood there wondering if maybe I'd actually died at some point during the evening, and this was just some weird purgatory where I had to watch my wife pretend I didn't exist for all eternity. Dr. Perez's wife Linda caught my eye and mouthed sorry when nobody was looking, which somehow made it worse because it meant other people were noticing this train wreck too. The pity from strangers hits different, you know? It's one thing to feel like garbage. It's another thing entirely when other people can see that you're being treated like garbage and feel bad enough to offer silent sympathy across a crowded room. At one point, I excused myself to use the bathroom, which nobody acknowledged because why would they? And as I walked away, I heard Melissa laugh at something someone said. That real genuine laugh she used to give me back when we first started dating, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that at anything I'd said. Maybe 6 months ago? A year? Had it been longer? Even the catering staff had started giving me pitying looks. The same waiter from earlier came by with his tray and whispered, "Hang in there, man. Open bar ends at 10, and there's excellent cheesecake coming out in 15 minutes. Sometimes you gotta find joy in the small things." "Thanks," I told him sincerely. "You're literally the nicest person who's talked to me all night, and I don't even know your name." "Marcus," he said. "And for what it's worth, you seem like a decent dude who deserves better than whatever this is." He gestured vaguely at the whole scene with his tray. "Marcus, you're a gentleman and a scholar," I said. "And yes, I will absolutely be getting that cheesecake." He grinned and moved on, leaving me standing there in my $1,000 suit, feeling like $1,000,000 worth of invisible. That's when she arrived. And I'm not being dramatic when I say the entire energy of the room shifted like someone had just turned up the gravity by about 30%. Dr. Victoria Lane, Vice President of Operations at Pharmatech Solutions, walked into that ballroom like she owned not just the company, but possibly the entire concept of confidence itself. She wasn't tall, maybe 5'7" in heels, but she carried herself like she was 10 feet tall and made of titanium. Her burgundy dress was elegant without trying too hard. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that said, "I'm here for business, but I also have a life." And when she moved through the crowd, people naturally parted like she was royalty, and they were all just extras in her movie. I watched Melissa's entire body language change the second Victoria entered her field of vision. My wife literally stood up straighter, smoothed down her dress like she was about to meet the Queen of England, and I swear I saw her take a deep breath like she was preparing for a performance review that would determine the rest of her natural life. It was actually kind of fascinating in a sad way, watching someone who'd been so confident and controlling all evening suddenly turn into a nervous, in turn hoping to get noticed by the teacher. Victoria made her rounds, graciously accepting greetings and congratulations on the company's recent FDA approval for some breakthrough drug I'd heard Melissa mention approximately 8,000 times over dinner for the past 6 months. She had this way of making everyone feel like they were the only person in the room when she talked to them, giving them her full attention for those 30 seconds before moving on, leaving them glowing like they'd just been blessed by some corporate deity. And then she looked at me. Actually looked at me, not through me or past me, or at me like I was a curiosity in a museum, but at me like I was an actual person worth acknowledging. She walked directly over to where Melissa and I were standing, and I watched my wife's face go through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds, settling somewhere between thrilled and terrified. "Melissa, wonderful work on the Phase 3 trials," Victoria said warmly, shaking my wife's hand with genuine appreciation. Then she turned to me with a smile that actually reached her eyes, which was such a foreign concept at this point that I almost didn't know how to process it. "And you must be Aaron. Melissa mentioned you run a logistics optimization firm specializing in pharmaceutical distribution." "Wait, hold up, pause, rewind. Melissa mentioned me? Like, specifically mentioned what I actually did for a living with accurate details and everything?" That was news to me, and judging by the slightly panicked look that flashed across my wife's face, it might have been news to her too. Either Victoria had done her homework, or there'd been some conversation I wasn't aware of where Melissa had actually described my career with something resembling accuracy and respect. "Yes, ma'am," I said, trying not to sound as surprised as I felt. "I work primarily in cold chain logistics and supply chain optimization. Basically, I make sure expensive drugs don't end up playing hide and seek in warehouses or turning into very pricey puddles in the back of trucks. She laughed, and it wasn't that polite cocktail party laugh that people do when they're being diplomatic. It was real, genuine amusement at my stupid joke, and I felt something in my chest unclench that I hadn't even realized was tight. "That's an excellent way to put it," she said, and then she did something that absolutely floored me. She actually wanted to continue the conversation with me about my work, like I was a real person with valuable expertise worth discussing. We started talking about distribution efficiency systems, the nightmare of maintaining temperature integrity across multiple shipping zones, the complications of rural delivery networks, cost reduction strategies that didn't compromise product safety, and all the FDA compliance hoops you had to jump through that made everything 10 times more complicated. Victoria asked smart questions, the kind that told me she actually understood what I was talking about and wasn't just being polite. She leaned in slightly when I explained a particularly complex solution we'd implemented for a client, nodding thoughtfully and occasionally interjecting with observations that showed she was actually processing the information. "We've been struggling with distribution inefficiencies in our Midwest network," she said, her expression turning more serious. "We're losing about 8% of shipments to quality degradation during transit. Your insights are fascinating. Have you worked with predictive routing algorithms?" Meanwhile, Melissa was standing there looking like she'd just watched her car get towed while she was holding a parking ticket, her smile frozen in place, but her eyes darting between Victoria and me like she was watching a tennis match where the ball was made of her worst nightmare. Every time I said something that Victoria responded to positively, I could literally feel my wife's anxiety levels climbing. It was like watching someone's internal thermostat break in real time. Victoria kept asking questions about my work, about case studies, about specific technical challenges, and I found myself actually enjoying this party for the first time all night. Here was someone who not only acknowledged my existence, but seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, who treated me like an expert in my field rather than some inconvenient plus one who needed to be managed and controlled. We talked about blockchain applications in supply chain transparency, about IoT sensor networks, about the future of autonomous delivery systems in pharmaceutical logistics. "You clearly know your stuff, Aaron," Victoria said after I'd explained a particularly innovative solution we developed for a client's distribution crisis. "I'm impressed. We should definitely continue this conversation in a more professional setting." Melissa looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole, or maybe swallow me, or possibly just swallow the entire evening so it could be erased from existence. Her face had gone through several shades of pale, settling on a color I'd describe as existential dread with undertones of barely suppressed panic. This was probably the first time all night that anyone had given me more attention than her, and she was handling it about as well as a cat handles a bath. And me? I was just standing there enjoying my little comeback tour, sipping my drink, having an actual intelligent conversation with someone who valued my expertise, and feeling like maybe I wasn't completely invisible after all. It was a nice change of pace from being treated like human furniture. After about 3 hours of forced smiles, fake laughter, and watching my wife network like her life depended on it, which honestly it probably did, I needed an escape route before I started screaming into the decorative ice sculptures or doing something equally dramatic and career-ending for both of us. The ballroom had become suffocating, all recycled air and recycled conversations, and I could feel my sanity starting to pack its bags and head for the exit. So I did what any reasonable person would do when faced with an insufferable social situation. I found the nearest door that led anywhere else and took it. The rooftop terrace was like stepping into a different universe, one where the air was actually breathable and you didn't have to pretend to care about quarterly earnings reports. The city stretched out below in a carpet of lights that looked like someone had spilled a jewelry box across the darkness, and the cool night air hit my face like a blessing from whatever deity protected husbands who were slowly losing their minds at corporate events. There were a few heat lamps scattered around, some tasteful outdoor furniture that probably cost more than my first car, and most importantly, there was silence. Blessed, beautiful silence that wasn't filled with the sound of my wife pretending I didn't exist. I loosened my tie, took a deep breath that actually filled my lungs, and seriously contemplated whether I could just stay up here for the rest of the evening. Maybe I could claim I'd gotten lost. Maybe I could fake a medical emergency. Maybe I could just leap from building to building like a depressed Batman until I made it home, changed into sweatpants, and pretended this whole night had been a bad dream brought on by questionable Chinese takeout. Rough night? A voice said behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin because apparently my ninja detection skills were offline due to emotional exhaustion. I turned around to find Victoria standing there with 2 glasses of red wine, looking amused at my startled reaction. She ditched her blazer somewhere along the way, and she looked more relaxed up here, less like a corporate VP and more like an actual human being who also needed a break from the circus downstairs. "Do I look that broken?" I asked, trying to regain some composure and probably failing miserably. "Not broken," she said, walking over and handing me one of the wine glasses. "Just unappreciated. There's a difference." She leaned against the railing next to me, looking out at the city lights with an expression that suggested she'd been to enough of these events to recognize a fellow sufferer when she saw one. We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our wine and watching the city pretend to be peaceful below us. It was nice, actually having someone's company without feeling like I needed to perform or prove something or justify my existence. Just 2 people drinking wine and acknowledging that sometimes corporate events were their own special kind of hell. "I've been to about 100 of these things," Victoria said finally, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "And I've gotten pretty good at reading people. You know what I've noticed?" She turned to look at me, and there was something in her expression that was equal parts curious and sympathetic. "Melissa talks about everyone's spouse, Dr. Sanders' husband and his vintage car collection that he restores on weekends, Dr. Patel's wife and her art gallery in Soho, even Dr. Kim's partner and their charity work with homeless youth programs. She brags about their accomplishments, uses them as social currency, makes sure everyone knows how impressive her colleagues' families are." She paused, taking a sip of wine, and I had a sinking feeling I knew where this was going. "But she never mentions you. Never talks about your business, your achievements, your expertise. In fact, until I specifically asked her about you last month during a board meeting, I didn't even know what you did for a living. Why is that?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke, and I felt something uncomfortable twist in my chest because hearing someone else point out what I'd been trying not to acknowledge for months somehow made it more real. I laughed, but it came out bitter and a little broken. Because apparently being successful in logistics isn't sexy enough for her new corporate image. "I don't have a gallery or restore vintage cars or run a charity. I just make sure things get from point A to point B without falling apart. And somehow that's not impressive enough to mention at cocktail parties." Victoria's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine anger on my behalf, which was weird because we barely knew each other, and yet here she was, more upset about my treatment than my own wife had been in months. "That's ridiculous," she said flatly. "Do you know how many companies would kill for someone with your expertise? Do you know how much money you could save an organization like ours? Your work is literally the difference between a successful drug launch and a multi-million-dollar disaster. Try telling my wife that," I said, taking a long drink of wine. Pretty sure she sees me as just another box to check on her perfect life checklist. Husband? Check. House in a good neighborhood? Check. Someone to bring to company events so she doesn't look weird showing up alone? Check and check. Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you feel like maybe the universe wasn't completely garbage after all. "You know what I think? I think competence is incredibly attractive. Intelligence is attractive. Someone who's genuinely good at what they do and doesn't need to brag about it, that's attractive. And anyone who can't see that is an idiot." Before I could process what was probably the nicest thing anyone had said to me in months, she reached into her small clutch and pulled out a business card, pressing it into my hand. Her fingers lingered there for just a second longer than strictly professional, and when she leaned in closer, I could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. "Call me if you ever want to work with someone who actually values your expertise," she said quietly, and there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't just talking about business, though she was definitely talking about business too. "And if you ever want to have a conversation with a woman who appreciates what you bring to the table, well, I'm available for that too." Her hand was still on my shoulder, warm and solid and real, and we were standing there in this moment that felt like it belonged in a movie, The kind where the music swells and the city lights twinkle in the background and everything feels charged with possibility. I was very aware of how close she was, how her eyes were locked on mine, how this could very easily turn into something that would complicate my already complicated life in ways I hadn't even begun to consider. And that's exactly when I heard the sound of expensive heels clicking rapidly across the rooftop tiles, followed by a voice that could have frozen nitrogen. Get your hands off my husband. Chapter 5, the meltdown that broke LinkedIn. If you've never seen your wife's face transform from corporate professional to full-blown reality TV meltdown in approximately 0.3 seconds, let me tell you, it's quite the experience. Melissa's expression was this absolutely incredible mixture of pure rage, blind panic, and the kind of jealousy that could probably power a small city if you could figure out how to harness it. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that she'd gone from, "I'm a successful professional," to, "I will burn this entire building down faster than you could say hostile work environment." "Get your hands off my husband," she screamed. And I'm not exaggerating when I say her voice echoed across that entire rooftop like she was auditioning for a Greek tragedy. The few other people who'd escaped to the terrace for some fresh air immediately whipped out their phones, because of course they did. This was prime social media content, the kind of corporate drama that would be dissected in break rooms and group chats for months to come. I could practically hear someone whisper, "This is better than The Office," from somewhere near the heat lamps. Victoria, to her absolute credit, didn't even flinch. She calmly removed her hand from my shoulder, took a measured sip of her wine like this was just another Tuesday evening, and turned to face Melissa with the kind of composure that comes from years of dealing with difficult situations and people who were actively losing their minds. "Melissa," she said in a tone that was professional and maybe just slightly amused, "we were discussing business. Supply chain optimization, specifically. Perhaps you'd like to join the conversation?" "Oh, sure," Melissa snapped, her voice dripping with so much sarcasm it could have stripped paint off the walls. "Discussing business with your hand on his shoulder? In the dark? On a romantic rooftop? Do you think I'm stupid?" She was advancing on us now, her designer heels clicking against the stone tiles like a countdown to detonation, and I was genuinely concerned she might actually throw hands with her own boss, which would have been spectacular and career-ending in equal measure. "Technically," I said, because apparently my mouth had decided that now was the perfect time to demonstrate my inability to read a room. "This is considered a shoulder-to-shoulder mentoring situation. I'm pretty sure HR has a whole pamphlet about appropriate workplace physical contact, and shoulder touching is on page 3 under generally acceptable in professional contexts." Nobody laughed. Well, nobody except Marcus the waiter, who I could see watching from the doorway with a tray of empty glasses and an expression of absolute delight. He gave me a subtle thumbs up that I appreciated even as I realized I'd probably just made everything exponentially worse. "This is unbelievable," Melissa hissed, and she'd moved past screaming into that deadly quiet anger that's somehow more terrifying. "You're hitting on my husband at a company event? You're my boss. This is sexual harassment. This is abuse of power. This is..." "Footage," Victoria interrupted calmly, gesturing to the security cameras mounted discreetly around the rooftop perimeter that I honestly hadn't even noticed until that exact moment. "There are 3 cameras with audio recording up here, Melissa. Feel free to report this to HR. The footage will show exactly what happened, which was a professional conversation about logistics that you've now turned into a scene that I guarantee at least 6 people are currently uploading to social media." She wasn't wrong. I could see phone screens glowing in the darkness like fireflies, all pointed in our direction, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most documented professional meltdown in Pharmatech Solutions history. Someone was definitely going to make a TikTok out of this. Probably multiple TikToks. Maybe a whole series. But Melissa was past the point of rational thought. She'd gone full nuclear, and there was no bringing her back from the edge now. "You're a predator," she shouted, loud enough that I was pretty sure people in the ballroom below could hear her. "You're a predatory cougar who preys on married men. You're probably doing this to half the husbands here. This is disgusting. This is..." "That's enough," Victoria said, and her voice had gone from amused to ice cold in an instant. The temperature on that rooftop dropped about 20 degrees, and even Melissa seemed to realize she'd just crossed a line that you didn't come back from. You've just publicly accused me of sexual harassment and called me a predator in front of witnesses and cameras. You've created a hostile work environment, engaged in insubordination, and slandered a senior executive. I strongly suggest you stop talking immediately and consult with HR first thing Monday morning. The silence that followed was the kind that makes your ears ring. Even the city noise from below seemed to quiet down, like the universe itself was holding its breath waiting to see what would happen next. Melissa's face had gone from angry red to terrified white as the implications of what she'd just done started to sink in through the fog of her jealous rage. I didn't mean, she started, but Victoria held up one hand. Save it for HR, she said coolly. Then she turned to me, and her expression softened just slightly. Erin, it was lovely talking with you. I meant what I said about the consultation work. My offer stands. She handed me another business card, because apparently she carried multiple, and walked past Melissa toward the door like she was simply leaving a particularly boring meeting rather than the scene of a career-ending meltdown. As she passed Marcus, I heard her say, "Make sure someone sends me the footage from tonight. For documentation purposes." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, looking like he'd just been given the best assignment of his entire serving career. And then it was just me and Melissa standing on that rooftop, with half a dozen people still recording on their phones, and the dawning realization on my wife's face that she'd just nuked her entire career from orbit over a conversation about supply chain logistics and some wine on a rooftop. The phones were still out, still recording, capturing every moment of her breakdown for posterity and HR's investigative file. Erin, she said, her voice small and broken now, all the fight gone out of her. Erin, I didn't mean to. Yeah, I said, pocketing Victoria's business card. You never do. And I walked past her toward the door, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of her own making, probably already calculating how much this was going to cost her and coming up with numbers that made her want to throw up. Behind me, I could hear her start to cry, but for the first time in years, I didn't turn back. The drive home felt like being trapped in a confession booth, except the priest had left, God wasn't answering, and the only person there to witness your sins was your husband, who'd just watched you commit career suicide in high definition. Melissa was in the passenger seat of our Audi, phone pressed to her ear with the desperation of someone trying to bail water out of the Titanic with a teaspoon, calling literally everyone in her contact list who might possibly have the power to undo what had just happened. Spoiler alert, nobody had that power, because you can't unring a bell that's been recorded from 6 different angles and was probably already trending on Twitter. Jessica, please, you have to listen to me. Melissa was saying into her phone, her voice doing that thing where it gets higher and tighter when panic really sets in. It was a misunderstanding. I was just protecting my marriage. Victoria was being completely inappropriate with my husband, and she paused, listening, and I watched her face crumble in real time as whatever Jessica was saying on the other end clearly wasn't what she wanted to hear. What do you mean it's already online? How is it already online? We left 15 minutes ago. I kept my eyes on the road, navigating through the downtown traffic that was somehow still heavy even at 11 at night, and tried to feel something other than this weird combination of satisfaction and exhaustion. Part of me wanted to gloat, wanted to point out that this was what happened when you treated people like disposable accessories and then freaked out the second someone showed them basic respect. But mostly I just felt tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from maintaining a performance for so long that you forget what your actual face looks like without the mask. Oh my God, Melissa breathed, and I glanced over to see her staring at her phone screen like it had just told her the world was ending, which for her career it probably had. Oh my God, Jennifer from accounting sent me the TikTok. Erin, there's a TikTok. Someone made a TikTok of me screaming at Victoria, and it has. She scrolled frantically, her fingers shaking. It has 47,000 views already. 47,000. And the comments? Oh God. The comments are calling me psychotic and unhinged and... Maybe don't read the comments, I suggested mildly, taking a turn toward our neighborhood. That's like rule number 1 of internet survival. Never read the comments. She ignored me, continuing to scroll with the kind of horrified fascination people have when watching footage of their own car accident. Someone made a remix, she whispered. They auto-tuned my voice and made a remix of me yelling, "Get your hands off my husband." And it's actually kind of catchy. Oh my God, I'm a meme. I'm a corporate meltdown meme. By the time we pulled into our driveway in our nice suburban neighborhood with the HOA that definitely didn't allow for public scandals, Melissa had called approximately 17 people ranging from her direct supervisor to her college roommate to someone I was pretty sure was her hairstylist. Each call had ended with some variation of, "Oh my God, it's already online," followed by the soul-crushing realization that yes, it was very much already online, and no, there was no delete button for viral corporate meltdowns. She sat in the car for a moment after I turned off the engine, staring at her phone like it might spontaneously combust, which honestly would have probably been a mercy at this point. The glow from the screen lit up her face in the darkness, and I could see the exact moment another wave of panic hit when she presumably saw another notification or comment or share or whatever metric of public humiliation was currently climbing. "Aaron," she said finally, turning to me with eyes that were red from crying and probably from staring at a screen for 30 minutes straight. "Aaron, please. You have to help me. You have to talk to Victoria for me. Tell her it was all a misunderstanding. Tell her I was just emotional and I didn't mean any of it. Tell her. Tell her what exactly?" I interrupted, and I was genuinely curious what spin she thought could possibly salvage this situation. "Tell her that you didn't mean it when you called her a predatory cougar in front of half the company and multiple recording devices? Tell her you didn't mean it when you accused your boss of sexual harassment based on absolutely nothing? Which part didn't you mean, Melissa? I saw her touching you, and I saw the way she was looking at you, and she made this helpless gesture with her hands like she was trying to physically grasp an explanation that made sense. You're my husband. Mine. And she was standing there acting like she had some right to you. Like she could just have a professional conversation with me. I finished. Treat me like I had valuable expertise. Acknowledge that I exist and have thoughts worth listening to. Yeah, I can see how that would be threatening considering you've spent the entire evening pretending I was just a mobile drink dispenser. She flinched like I'd slapped her, and maybe I should have felt bad about that, but I really didn't. That's not fair, she said weakly. I was networking. I was trying to make connections and maintain my professional image and I was an inconvenience to that image, I said flatly. I get it. The problem is, you got so wrapped up in maintaining your perfect corporate persona that you forgot I'm an actual person, and when someone else remembered that fact, you lost your mind and nuked your career on a rooftop in front of God and TikTok. We sat there in silence for a moment, and I could hear her phone buzzing continuously with what I assumed were notifications, messages, calls from people who'd seen the footage. The suburban night was quiet around us. All our neighbors probably asleep, or at least pretending to be, unaware that the couple in the colonial with the nice lawn was currently sitting in their driveway, having the kind of conversation that typically preceded major life changes. Should I also explain to Victoria why you called your boss a cougar in 4K resolution? I asked, because apparently I wasn't done yet. Because I'm pretty sure that's the kind of thing that HR tends to frown upon. Actually, I'm not pretty sure. I'm absolutely certain, because I may just do something with logistics, but even I know that publicly slandering your superior is generally considered a career-limiting move. This isn't funny, Aaron, she said, and her voice cracked on my name. You're absolutely right. I agreed, opening my car door. It's not funny at all. It's hilarious. You finally noticed me tonight, Melissa. After months of treating me like I was invisible, you finally saw me. But the only reason you noticed is because your career is currently on fire and you need me to be your emergency extinguisher. That's not really the heartwarming marriage moment you seem to think it is. I got out of the car and headed toward our front door, leaving her sitting there in the passenger seat, phone still glowing in the darkness, probably refreshing her social media to watch the view count climb on her public humiliation. Behind me, I heard her car door open and her heels on the driveway, but I didn't turn around. Some fires you just had to let burn. 3 days after what was now being referred to on corporate Twitter as the Pharmatech rooftop incident, complete with its own hashtag and several meme accounts, I got an email from Victoria Lane's executive assistant requesting a meeting at Pharmatech headquarters. I stared at that email for a solid 10 minutes, reading and rereading it like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense or was less terrifying, trying to figure out if this was a good thing or if I was about to be dragged into the HR nightmare that Melissa had created like collateral damage in her personal disaster movie. Melissa, for her part, had spent the last 72 hours locked in our home office. alternating between crying, refreshing her social media feeds, and having increasingly desperate phone conversations with people who could maybe possibly help her salvage what was left of her career. Spoiler alert. There wasn't much left to salvage. The video of her meltdown had gone properly viral, the kind of viral where morning talk shows were using it as an example of workplace behavior to avoid, and business podcasts were doing entire episodes on managing emotional regulation in professional settings. Someone had even made a remix that was climbing the Spotify comedy charts, which was both impressive and deeply, deeply sad. I didn't tell her about Victoria's meeting request, partly because I genuinely didn't know what it was about and didn't want to give her false hope or send her into another spiral, and partly because I was still processing my own complicated feelings about the whole situation. Was I supposed to feel guilty that my wife's career had imploded? Was I supposed to feel vindicated that someone had finally seen value in me? Was I allowed to be excited about a potential business opportunity, even though it came from the woman my wife had publicly accused of being a predator? The emotional calculus was exhausting, and I was running low on the energy required to care about anyone's feelings except my own. So on Thursday morning, I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one that made me look like I actually knew what I was doing, and drove downtown to the Pharmatech Solutions building, which was one of those modern glass towers that looked like it had been designed by someone who really believed in the power of natural light and expensive architecture. The lobby alone probably cost more than my entire house, all marble and steel and abstract art that I was pretty sure was supposed to mean something profound, but mostly just looked like someone had sneezed paint onto a canvas and called it genius. Victoria's assistant, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s named Caroline who had the kind of efficiency that suggested she could probably run a small country in her spare time, greeted me with a professional smile and escorted me up to the executive floor. The elevator ride felt like it took approximately 17 years, and I spent the entire time wondering if I should have rehearsed what I was going to say, or prepared some kind of statement, or maybe just fake my own death and move to Canada. Victoria's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone at her level. Corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, and that particular smell of success that's part expensive leather and part intimidation. She was sitting behind a mahogany desk that looked like it could double as a small aircraft carrier, typing something on her computer, and when I walked in she looked up and smiled like I was an actual appointment she'd been looking forward to rather than an obligation or a problem to be managed. "Aaron," she said warmly, standing up and coming around the desk to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming. I hope the request wasn't too sudden." She was dressed in a navy power suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and she looked every inch the executive VP, but her smile was genuine and her handshake was firm without being aggressive. "Please sit." I sat in one of the leather chairs across from her desk, trying to look casual and probably failing spectacularly, and waited for her to explain why I was here. Was this about the rooftop incident? Was I going to be asked to make some kind of statement? Was this actually a trap, and I was about to be served with papers for something I didn't even know I'd done? Victoria sat down across from me, not behind her desk, which would have been the power move, but in the other chair, so we were more or less on the same level, and she slid a folder across the small table between us. "I'm going to be direct because I think you appreciate directness," she said. "This is a proposal for a 3-year consulting contract with Pharmatech Solutions. Full logistics overhaul of our distribution network, with your firm as the lead consultant. We're talking comprehensive supply chain optimization, cold chain integrity improvements, predictive routing implementation, the works." I opened the folder, my hands shaking slightly because this was not at all what I'd been expecting, and started reading through the terms. And then I saw the numbers, the actual dollar amounts. And I had to read them 3 times because surely there was a decimal point in the wrong place, or maybe I'd suddenly developed dyslexia, or possibly I was having a stroke. "This can't be right," I said, looking up at her. "These numbers are accurate," she finished. "That's what your expertise is worth, Aaron. That's what solving our distribution problems is worth. We're currently losing somewhere between $8 and $12 million annually to inefficiencies, spoilage, and distribution failures. If you can cut that by even 50%, you'll have paid for yourself 3 times over in the first year alone." I sat back in my chair, trying to process what was happening. This was the kind of contract that would take my small firm and turn it into something significant, The kind of opportunity that most consultants spent their entire careers hoping to land. I have to ask, I said carefully, is this some kind of revenge deal? Like, you're offering me this because of what happened with Melissa? Because if that's what this is business, Victoria interrupted firmly. I don't make multi-million-dollar decisions based on personal drama, Aaron. I make them based on competence, expertise, and return on investment. I've done my research on your firm. I've talked to 3 of your former clients. I've reviewed case studies of your work. You're talented, you're innovative, and your success rate is impressive. The fact that your wife couldn't see that is her loss and, potentially, my company's gain. She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. I'll be honest with you. What happened on that rooftop was unfortunate, and Melissa is currently suspended pending a full HR investigation. But that has nothing to do with this offer. I was already planning to approach you about consulting work before that gala even happened. The rooftop conversation just confirmed what I'd already suspected, that you're intelligent, composed under pressure, and significantly undervalued in your current situation. My current situation being my marriage? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Your current professional network, she corrected smoothly, but there was a slight smile on her face that suggested she knew exactly what I'd meant. Though I suppose those things are sometimes connected. I looked down at the contract again, at the numbers that could change my entire business trajectory, at the scope of work that was both challenging and exciting, at the 3-year timeline that represented a significant commitment from both sides. This was real. This was legitimate. This was the kind of opportunity that I'd be an idiot to turn down, even if the circumstances around it were complicated as hell. I'd need to have my lawyer review this, I said, which was the smart thing to say even though every part of me wanted to sign it right there and then. Of course, Victoria said. Take your time. Have your lawyer review it. Have your accountant review it. Hell, have your therapist review it if that would make you feel better. I want you to be completely comfortable with this arrangement. She stood up, and I followed suit, and we shook hands again. Her grip was confident, her smile was professional but warm, and when she said, I look forward to working with you, Aaron, I actually believed that she meant it. As I walked out of her office with the folder under my arm, feeling like I'd just stepped into an alternate universe where people actually valued my work, I passed Caroline's desk, and she gave me a knowing smile. Congratulations, she said quietly. Mrs. Lane doesn't usually spend that much time on consultation contracts unless she's really impressed. I made it to my car before I called my lawyer, my accountant, and then my business partner Derek, who'd been running our firm with me since we'd started it 8 years ago. Dude, I said when he picked up, you're not going to believe what just happened. Let me guess, Derek said dryly. Your wife's meltdown video hit 10 million views. Better, I said, pulling the contract out of the folder. We just got offered the contract of a lifetime, and my accountant is probably going to faint when I tell him the numbers. There was a pause. Because of the meltdown or in spite of it? Apparently in spite of it, I said, grinning at my steering wheel like an idiot. Turns out being good at what you do actually matters to some people. Huh, Derek said. Wild concept. So when do we start? After my lawyer makes sure this isn't actually a very elaborate prank, I said. But assuming it's real? Soon. Very soon. I hung up and sat in my car in the Pharmatech parking garage, holding a contract that represented everything I'd been working toward for years, offered by a woman who'd seen my value in a single conversation while my wife had spent years overlooking it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the opportunity. I started the car and headed home, where Melissa was probably still refreshing her social media feeds and trying to figure out how to explain temporary suspension pending investigation on her LinkedIn profile. I didn't know what I was going to tell her about this meeting, or if I was going to tell her anything at all. But for the first time in years, I felt like maybe the story wasn't just about her anymore. Working with Victoria was like stepping through a portal into an alternate dimension where people actually listened when I talked and didn't treat my opinions like suggestions from a moderately intelligent golden retriever. Our first official meeting happened the following Monday in Pharmatech's main conference room, which had one of those huge tables that could probably seat the entire United Nations and a video screen that was larger than my first apartment. I showed up with my laptop, 3 different presentations I'd prepared over the weekend, and the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing this could either be the beginning of something incredible or a spectacular disaster that would haunt me for years. Victoria walked in exactly on time, because of course she did, followed by her distribution team leads. James from logistics, Patricia from quality assurance, and Marcus from IT, who was thankfully not the same Marcus who'd been serving drinks at the gala, but who seemed equally competent and significantly more sober. They all looked at me with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism, which was fair because I was basically the new guy who'd been hired under somewhat dramatic circumstances that probably everyone in the building had heard about by now. "All right," Victoria said, settling into her chair at the head of the table and looking directly at me. "Aaron, show us what you've got. And everyone else, I expect you to actually listen and engage. He's here because he's good at what he does, not because of any other reason, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me after this meeting." The room got very quiet very fast, and I realized she'd just preemptively shut down any gossip or speculation about why I was really there. It was a power move that both protected me and made it clear that this was business, period, end of discussion. I kind of loved her for it, in a purely professional way that I definitely wasn't going to examine too closely right now. I launched into my presentation, outlining the problems I'd identified in their current distribution system just from the preliminary data they'd sent me. Temperature inconsistencies during transport, inefficient routing that added unnecessary time and cost, lack of real-time monitoring that meant problems weren't caught until it was too late, and a communication breakdown between warehouses and delivery teams that would have been funny if it wasn't costing them millions. The team started out polite but cautious, but about 15 minutes in, Patricia interrupted with a question about my proposed IoT sensor solution, and suddenly we were having an actual conversation instead of me just talking at people. James wanted to know about implementation timelines. Marcus got excited about the data analytics dashboard I'd mocked up. Patricia had concerns about FDA compliance, which were completely valid, and I had answers that satisfied her. Victoria just sat there watching the whole thing with this expression that I couldn't quite read, but that seemed pleased, taking notes occasionally and letting her team engage without micromanaging the conversation. By the time we wrapped up 2 hours later, we'd mapped out a preliminary implementation strategy, identified the highest priority problems to tackle first, and scheduled follow-up meetings with each department. James actually shook my hand and said, "This is good work, man. Really good work." Patricia nodded approvingly and told me she looked forward to our next meeting. Even Marcus, who'd been the most skeptical at the start, admitted that my technical approach was solid. As everyone filed out, Victoria hung back, and when the door closed behind the last person, she turned to me with a smile that was part professional pride and part something else I definitely wasn't going to think about right now. "That was impressive," she said simply. "You handled their questions perfectly, you addressed their concerns without being defensive, and you got buy-in from a team that typically resists any kind of change. Well done." "Thanks," I said, feeling genuinely good about myself for the first time in months. "Your team is sharp. They asked the right questions." "They did," she agreed. "Because I hire smart people." Speaking of which, she moved a little closer, and I was suddenly very aware that we were alone in this conference room with its glass walls that anyone could see through but nobody could hear through. "How are you holding up?" "With everything." She didn't have to specify what everything meant. We both knew she was talking about Melissa, the suspension, the ongoing HR investigation, the viral videos that were still making rounds on social media. My home life had essentially become a disaster zone where my wife oscillated between blaming me for not defending her and begging me to somehow fix things, neither of which I was particularly interested in doing. "I'm managing," I said honestly. "It's complicated. But this," I gestured at the conference room, the presentation materials, the whole situation. "This is good. This is really good. It reminds me that I'm actually good at something, which is a feeling I'd kind of forgotten about." Victoria's expression softened, and she reached out and touched my arm, just briefly, professionally, but with genuine warmth. "You're more than good at something, Aaron. You're excellent. And I don't just mean professionally, though that's certainly true." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I know this is a complicated situation. I know there are boundaries we need to maintain, but I want you to know that I see you. Not as Melissa's husband, not as a consolation prize or a revenge plot or whatever people might be saying. I see you as a talented professional who deserves to be valued, and as someone who's probably been underestimated for far too long." There was something in her voice that suggested she wasn't just talking about my professional life anymore, and I felt something shift in the air between us, something charged and complicated and potentially dangerous if we weren't careful. But before either of us could say anything else, her phone buzzed with what was apparently an urgent message, and the moment passed. "I have a board meeting," she said with a slight grimace. "But same time next week?" "And Aaron," she smiled as she gathered her things, "I don't mix business with pleasure as a general rule. But if I did, I'd make sure the pleasure part was just as efficient and well executed as the business part." She walked out, leaving me standing there in that conference room, wondering if she'd just flirted with me or given me a performance review or possibly both, and realizing that for the first time in my marriage, I was actually thinking about what it would be like to be with someone who saw me as an equal rather than an accessory. It was a dangerous thought, the kind that led to complicated decisions and life changes and probably therapy. But damn if it didn't feel good to be seen. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the same Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom where my life had effectively imploded and rebuilt itself in the span of one chaotic evening. Except this time, I wasn't the invisible +1 hovering awkwardly by the bar wondering if anyone would notice if I just left. This time, I was walking in as Victoria Lane's business partner, and yeah, maybe something more than that, though we'd been incredibly careful about keeping the professional and personal aspects of our relationship separate enough that HR couldn't find anything to complain about even if they wanted to. The transformation in 6 months had been nothing short of surreal. My firm had gone from a respectable but small operation to landing 3 major contracts off the back of the Pharmatech success story, which had already saved them over $12 million and was being used as a case study in supply chain optimization that industry publications were actually writing articles about. My team had grown from 15 people to 32. We'd moved into a bigger office that didn't smell like the previous tenant's questionable life choices, and I'd been invited to speak at 2 conferences about pharmaceutical logistics, which was apparently a thing people cared about when you were good at it. Melissa, on the other hand, had been officially terminated from Pharmatech after the HR investigation concluded that she'd created a hostile work environment, engaged in insubordination, and publicly slandered a senior executive with absolutely no evidence to support her claims. The viral video hadn't helped her case, obviously, and neither had the fact that 3 other employees came forward during the investigation to report that she'd been increasingly difficult to work with over the past year. She'd eventually landed a position at some pharmaceutical research facility in Wisconsin, which she described to her mother as a strategic lateral move, but which everyone else understood to be a massive demotion to a place where her main colleagues were probably going to be cornfields and regret. We were separated now, officially, with divorce papers that had been filed 2 months ago and were currently working their way through the legal system at the speed of bureaucracy, which is to say glacially slow but inevitably final. She'd moved out of our house and into an apartment near her new job, taking half the furniture and all of her wounded pride with her. The last conversation we'd had was about dividing up the wedding china, which she'd insisted she wanted even though neither of us had used it in 5 years, and which I'd happily given her, because honestly, good riddance to both the plates and the marriage they represented. Tonight's gala was Pharmatech's annual event again, a full year after the rooftop incident that had launched 1,000 memes, and the energy in the room was completely different from my perspective. Victoria and I arrived together, which raised exactly 0 eyebrows because everyone knew we'd been working closely together and, after 6 months of respectful distance and careful professionalism, we'd finally decided that we were both adults who could make our own decisions about our personal lives without requiring permission from the court of public opinion. She looked stunning in an emerald green dress that probably cost more than my first car, but was somehow understated enough to be elegant rather than showy. And when we walked in together, people actually greeted me by name. Not Melissa's husband, or, that guy from the video, but Aaron Clark, the logistics consultant, or Aaron, great to see you again. It was a weird feeling, being recognized for my own accomplishments rather than as someone's accessory, and I was still getting used to it in the same way you get used to sunlight after living in a cave for too long. Dr. Perez spotted us almost immediately and came over with his wife Linda, who'd apparently become something of a friend over the past few months. "Aaron, Victoria, glad you both could make it," he said, shaking my hand enthusiastically. I was just telling Linda about how your routing optimization saved our Midwest distribution network. We haven't lost a single temperature-sensitive shipment in 4 months. For months. That's unheard of. That's what happens when you actually implement proper monitoring systems instead of hoping for the best and praying to the logistics gods, I said with a grin, and Linda laughed. I have to say, Linda added, glancing between Victoria and me with an expression that was knowing but kind. You two make a much better team than some other combinations we've seen at these events. She didn't say Melissa's name, but she didn't have to. We all knew exactly what combination she was referring to, and the ghost of that disaster was still floating around this ballroom like an awkward specter that everyone was politely pretending not to notice. Victoria slipped her hand into mine, which was a gesture that was both professional enough to be appropriate and personal enough to make a statement, and smiled at Linda. I believe in partnering with people who actually bring value to the table, she said smoothly. In business and in life. We made our rounds through the ballroom, and it was like watching a completely different movie of the same event. People wanted to talk to me now, not just as an obligatory courtesy, but because they were genuinely interested in what I had to say. James from Logistics pulled me aside to discuss expanding our contract to cover their European distribution network. Patricia from Quality Assurance introduced me to her counterpart from another pharmaceutical company who was interested in our services. Even the bartender, a different kid with better hair than the man-bun guy from last year, gave me a nod of recognition like I was a regular who deserved respect. Victoria had to give a speech at some point during the evening, talking about the company's achievements over the past year, and when she got to the part about operational improvements and cost savings, she actually called me out by name. Our partnership with Aaron Clark's firm has resulted in unprecedented improvements to our distribution efficiency, she said, gesturing toward where I was standing near the back of the crowd, trying not to look too pleased with myself. His innovative approach and expertise have saved this company over $12 million in the past 6 months alone, and I'm proud to say we've just signed an extension of our contract for another 3 years. The room applauded, and I felt my face get hot because public recognition was still weird even when it was positive. But Victoria was looking at me with this expression of genuine pride and maybe something else that made my chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with professional accomplishment. When she finished her speech and made her way back to me through the crowd, she was intercepted approximately 17 times by people who wanted to congratulate her or network or discuss business opportunities. But she kept glancing over at me like she was making sure I was still there, still real, still part of this life she was building. When she finally reached me, she took my hand again and leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something sophisticated that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. "Want to get some air?" she asked quietly, and there was something in her voice that made it clear she wasn't just talking about escaping the crowd for a breather. Last time we got air at one of these things, it ended in viral infamy and an HR investigation, I pointed out, but I was already moving toward the exit with her. "Yes, but this time you're here with someone who actually appreciates you," she said, and the smile she gave me was warm and real and a little bit dangerous in the best possible way. And I promised not to scream at anyone on the rooftop. We made it to the same rooftop terrace where everything had fallen apart a year ago, except this time the air felt different, lighter, like the universe had decided to give us a do-over on that entire evening. The city lights spread out below us like a promise, and Victoria turned to face me with an expression that was part professional pride and part something that had nothing to do with business contracts or logistics optimization. "You know what I realized?" she said, reaching up to loosen my tie slightly, her fingers lingering at my collar in a way that was definitely not HR approved. "A year ago, I watched a talented man being treated like he was invisible by someone who should have been proud to stand next to him. And I thought, what a waste. What an absolute waste of potential. And now," I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended, "now I get to watch that same man walk into a room and command respect because he earned it," she said softly. "Now I get to work with someone who challenges me intellectually and doesn't see me as a threat or a prize, but as an equal. Now I get to stand next to someone who makes me want to be better at everything I do. That's not a waste, Aaron. That's exactly what I was hoping for." She kissed me then, right there on the rooftop where everything had imploded a year ago, and it felt like closing one chapter and opening another, Like the universe was writing a better story, and we were finally getting the good parts. Somewhere below us, the gala continued. People networked and made deals and pretended to care about things they didn't really care about. But up here, in the cool night air with the city lights spread out like stars, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When someone asked me later that evening if I missed my old life, I said, not even a little bit. Turns out being respected is incredibly addicting, and I'm not interested in going back to being anyone's accessory ever again. Exactly 1 year after the chaos, Victoria and I returned to the Grand Meridian Ballroom for what had become Pharmatecha's biggest annual event yet, and this time we weren't just attending as business partners who happened to be dating. We were there celebrating the announcement of a new joint venture between Pharmatech and my firm, a partnership that was being hailed as innovative and forward-thinking and all those other buzzwords that corporate people love to throw around when something is actually working. The contract was worth enough money that my accountant had actually called me 3 times to make sure I hadn't accidentally added extra zeros, and when I assured him the numbers were correct, he'd gone silent for a solid 30 seconds before saying, "Holy shit," in a tone of reverent disbelief. The ballroom was packed with industry leaders, investors, journalists from pharmaceutical trade publications, and basically everyone who was anyone in the world of drug manufacturing and distribution. There was a photo shoot scheduled, interviews lined up, and a whole media package that Victoria's PR team had coordinated with the precision of a military operation. I was wearing a custom suit that actually fit properly. Victoria was in a stunning black dress that somehow managed to be both professional and devastating, and we were both running on adrenaline and expensive coffee. Victoria raised her champagne glass during the toast, standing at the front of the room with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you'd made all the right moves and won the game. "To valuable partnerships," she said, her eyes finding mine in the crowd, and there was a warmth in her gaze that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fact that we'd built something real together, both professionally and personally. "To recognizing potential before the rest of the world catches on. To women who notice talent when they see it," I added, raising my own glass. "And to men who were smart enough to take the opportunities they were offered, even when those opportunities came wrapped in complicated circumstances and viral videos." The room laughed, because by now the rooftop incident had become something of a legend in pharmaceutical industry circles, the kind of story people told at conferences about how drama and opportunity sometimes showed up at the same time. Someone had even made a case study out of it for a business school class about crisis management and professional pivots, which was both hilarious and slightly horrifying. We posed for photos together, Victoria's hand resting comfortably on my back, my arm around her waist, both of us smiling like people who'd figured out how to build something good from the wreckage of something that had been slowly dying for years. The photographers loved us, apparently, because we had chemistry and authenticity, and looked like a pharmaceutical power couple from a movie about corporate success stories with romantic subplots. As we stood there with camera flashes going off like small supernovas, I found myself thinking about that night a year ago when I'd stood in this same ballroom, feeling invisible and wondering when my marriage had turned into a performance piece where I played the role of human furniture. I thought about Melissa's face when she'd seen Victoria talking to me on the rooftop, that mixture of jealousy and panic and rage that had burned her entire career to the ground in about 30 seconds. I thought about the car ride home, her desperate phone calls, the way she'd looked at me like I was supposed to fix everything she'd broken. And then I thought about her face now, wherever she was in Wisconsin, probably scrolling through social media and seeing these photos, reading these press releases, watching me succeed in ways she'd never thought I could. I wondered if she felt regret, if she understood what she'd lost, if she'd finally figured out that treating people like accessories eventually meant they stopped wanting to be part of your collection. My phone buzzed in my pocket during a brief break between photo sessions, and I pulled it out to see a text message from a number I hadn't heard from in months, but still had saved in my contacts. Melissa. Of course it was Melissa. The universe had a sense of dramatic timing that would have been impressive if it wasn't so predictable. The message said, "I saw the announcement. Congratulations. I hope you're happy." I stared at that text for a long moment, reading the words and trying to figure out if there was genuine well-wishing in them, or if this was just another attempt to insert herself into my life, to remind me that she existed, To maybe open a door that I'd firmly closed and locked, and possibly set on fire for good measure. Victoria noticed me looking at my phone and raised an eyebrow in question, and I showed her the screen. She read it, her expression neutral, and then looked at me with those sharp eyes that never missed anything. "Are you going to respond?" she asked, and there was no judgment in her voice, just genuine curiosity about what I was going to do. I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds, which was probably 2 seconds longer than the message deserved. Then I deleted it without responding, slipped my phone back into my pocket, and took Victoria's hand. "No," I said simply. "I don't think I am. Because happiness doesn't need validation, especially not from someone who'd spent years making me feel like I needed to apologize for existing in her carefully curated life. Happiness doesn't require explanations or justifications or responses to text messages from people who only noticed your value after they'd thrown it away. Happiness just is, and right now, standing in this ballroom with a woman who saw me as a partner rather than a prop, celebrating success that I'd earned through my own expertise and hard work, I was genuinely, authentically happy in a way I hadn't been in years. Victoria squeezed my hand, understanding everything I wasn't saying, and smiled at me with that mixture of warmth and mischief that I'd come to associate with her. "Good choice," she said. "Now come on. We have 3 more interviews and a dinner with investors, and I need you charming and articulate, not distracted by ghosts of relationships past." "I can do charming and articulate," I said, grinning at her. "That's literally what you pay me for." "Among other things," she said with a smile that was definitely not appropriate for a professional setting. And I laughed because life had gotten weird and complicated and surprisingly wonderful in the span of a year. As we walked back toward the cameras and the journalists and the celebration of everything we'd built together, I didn't look back toward my phone or think about that unanswered message or wonder what Melissa was feeling right now. Because Victoria was right about one thing. Being valued hits different when it's genuine, when it comes from someone who sees you as an equal rather than an accessory, when it's built on respect and partnership rather than obligation and convenience. And I was done settling for anything less. At the family barbecue, my wife joked, "Who wants to trade my husband? He comes with low maintenance and no ambition." Her divorced neighbor replied, "I'll take him." My wife's smile disappeared when the neighbor added, "When should I pick him up?" If I'm being honest, that Saturday started off like the kind of day Norman Rockwell used to paint. Sunshine, laughter, the faint smell of charcoal, and suburban optimism hanging in the air. Music was blasting from someone's Bluetooth speaker, kids were running around the yard like caffeinated squirrels, and my grill was doing what it did best, sizzling with enough burgers to end at least one world conflict. It was the American dream, condensed into a backyard and seasoned with barbecue sauce. I was in my zone, tongs in one hand, beer in the other, feeling like the unofficial mayor of cul-de-sac diplomacy. The grill hissed and popped, that perfect soundtrack that says, "Yeah, life might be a circus, but at least you're the ringmaster today." And then, right when I thought I had it all together, bam, my wife, Sabrina, decided to turn our happy little cookout into a full-blown Netflix limited series. You know that feeling when you sense a storm coming but the sky's still blue? That was me. Sabrina was halfway through her 3rd glass of Chardonnay, lounging like she owned the rights to the conversation, holding court in her sun hat like the queen of gossip herself. Every wife in a 10-house radius was leaning in, laughing too loud at stories that were probably about their husband's incompetence. Meanwhile, the guys stood around pretending to care about the grill temperature or the game on someone's phone. It was a social ecosystem of survival, eye contact optional. I was just flipping a perfect medium-rare patty when I heard her voice slice through the laughter like a lawnmower through wet grass. "Who wants to trade my husband? He's low maintenance and has no ambition." It took a full 2 seconds for my brain to process what she said. My first thought was, she didn't just say that. My second thought was, oh yes, she absolutely did. Then the silence hit. Like, movie-style silence. Even the mosquitoes froze mid-flight. Somewhere, a child's juice box stopped making that slurping sound. The universe collectively held its breath. Every guy at that party suddenly developed a deep, spiritual relationship with his beer. Heads dropped. Eyes locked on amber liquid. I swear I could hear the sound of their internal panic. That whispered prayer of, "Please, Lord, don't let my wife get any ideas." I felt my face go warm, partly from the grill, partly from the slow burn of humiliation. Sabrina was smiling, that wine-fueled, "I'm just joking but not really" grin women get when they think they're being cute. The kind that comes with invisible daggers. And then, because fate enjoys a little chaos with its coleslaw, our divorced neighbor, Trish, raised her glass and said, clear as day, "I'll take him." Now, I know that moment didn't last longer than a heartbeat, but it felt like the world slowed down just to make sure I suffered in high definition. Every neck in that backyard swiveled toward her like synchronized Judgment Day. Sabrina's grin flickered, poof, gone faster than the beer evaporating on my grill. Trish wasn't joking either. You could see it in her eyes. She had that divorced and dangerous confidence. The kind of woman who's already been through the war and now collects ex-husbands' egos as trophies. She leaned back in her chair, took a slow sip of wine, and smirked like she'd just bought stock in drama. Meanwhile, my brain was doing a PowerPoint presentation titled, Possible Responses That Won't End in Divorce. Option 1, laugh it off. Option 2, pretend I didn't hear it. Option 3, crawl into the grill and let the fire take me. Before I could pick one, the awkward silence mutated into nervous laughter. That brittle kind of sound people make when they're terrified but trying to stay polite. Paul, my next-door neighbor, was coughing into his solo cup like it was a life raft. His wife was glaring at him so hard his eyebrows might never grow back. I straightened up, flipped the last burger, and smiled. If I was going down, I was going down with dignity, or at least with comedic timing. "Thanks for doing my marketing, honey," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Should I start packing now, or do you want to help me load the truck?" Cue the second wave of laughter, the please don't look at me kind. A few nervous chuckles, a couple of gasps, and one guy muttering, "Oh, hell no." Sabrina blinked. You could almost see her hangover forming in real time. "Oh my God, I was joking," she said, tone dripping with the kind of defensiveness that only makes it worse. Trish wasn't backing down. She twirled her wine glass like a Bond villain and said, "I meant it. When should I pick him up?" The tension was so thick you could spread it on toast. I caught Paul mouthing "damn," like he was at a sports event and someone just hit a home run. Sabrina's face, oh man, it went from smug to panic in 10 seconds flat. You could almost hear the gears grinding as she tried to figure out how to undo the mess she just made. I just shrugged and said, "Well, at least someone's showing interest in my potential." Paul whispered under his breath, "Man, your life just got syndicated." I laughed. "Yeah, but at least someone wants to renew my contract." And that, right there, was the kill shot. Because for the first time in what felt like 8 years of marriage, Sabrina didn't have a comeback. She just sat there, frozen, like a mannequin that forgot its line in a store display drama. Everyone tried to pretend the conversation was over, but the air had shifted. You could feel it. The way people avoided looking directly at me, the forced small talk about potato salad, the collective energy of "please let this end before someone cries." The burgers were still perfect, by the way. Juicy, charred just enough to make Gordon Ramsay nod in approval. But nobody cared. I could have served gold-plated steaks at that point, and no one would have tasted them over the awkward tension. Eventually, people started making excuses. "Oh, it's getting late. I think the kids need a nap. I forgot my cat's piano recital." The whole neighborhood vanished faster than free Wi-Fi in a hotel. Sabrina busied herself collecting plates that didn't need collecting, muttering something about people being too sensitive. I didn't say much, just stood by my grill, finishing my beer, staring at the smoke curling into the sky. You know that moment when you realize the joke wasn't a joke, it was a confession? That was it for me. Because the thing about Sabrina is, she's not cruel on purpose. She just likes attention more than accuracy. Her idea of funny usually came at someone else's expense, and for years, that someone was me. Every cookout, every dinner party, every damn office event, I was the punchline, the harmless husband, the guy with no ambition, no edge, no fire. And I played along because that's what you do when you love someone who doesn't quite see your value until someone else points it out. That night, standing there with grease-stained hands and the smell of smoke in my hair, I realized I was done auditioning for the role of supportive fool. So yeah, maybe it started with burgers, beer, and a casual act of public betrayal. But that was the moment the script flipped. Because when Trish raised her glass and said, I'll take him. I didn't hear flirtation. I heard freedom knocking. And let me tell you, I was just about ready to open that door. So there I was, standing in the middle of my backyard. My kingdom of charcoal, folding chairs, and broken dreams, and every pair of eyes was pointed right at me like I was the next act in a reality show nobody signed up for. You could practically hear the collective thought buzzing through the crowd. Is he gonna laugh, or is this about to turn into one of those viral neighborhood brawls on Facebook Live? I took my sweet time wiping my hands on the grill towel, partly to buy a few seconds, partly to make a point. When you've just been publicly auctioned off by your own wife, timing is everything. I looked up, forced a calm smile, and said, "Thanks for doing my marketing, honey. Should I start packing now, or do you want to help me load the truck?" You could feel the awkward laughter ripple through the crowd, that thin, nervous sound that says, "Please God, let someone say something else." It was the kind of laughter that's more about survival than humor. The guys laughed too hard, the women laughed too soft, and everyone looked around like they were trapped in a hostage situation where the ransom was emotional stability. And then, from her lawn chair of chaos, Trish leaned forward with that slow grin people get when they realize they just found the detonator. "I meant it," she said, raising her glass like she was toasting the end of my marriage. "When should I pick him up?" If silence had a temperature, that moment dropped about 20 degrees. Even the grill seemed to dim its enthusiasm. Sabrina's face went from wine-drunk and untouchable to, "Oh crap, did that just happen?" in half a second. Paul, my next-door neighbor and self-proclaimed marriage counselor, he's been divorced twice, so you do the math, muttered under his breath. "Man, your life just got syndicated." I turned my head, deadpan. "Yeah, but at least someone wants to renew my contract." That got another laugh, the kind that carries just enough truth to sting. Sabrina looked at me like I'd just committed high treason against the holy order of passive husbands. Her eyes narrowed, her lips twitched, and she gave that tight smile women use when they want to look calm, but are plotting your social execution. The crowd didn't know what to do. Half of them were pretending to scroll their phones. The other half were deeply invested in the art of staring at their shoes. Someone coughed. Someone else dropped a chip. It was like God himself pressed the awkward silence button and then went out for a smoke break. Now, here's the thing about Trish. She's not subtle. Never has been. She's been divorced for about 2 years, owns 3 rescue cats and a Jeep, and walks around with the kind of confidence that says, "Yeah, I've burned bridges, but at least I did it in heels." The woman thrives on uncomfortable moments. So, when she said she'd take me, everyone assumed it was a joke. But the way she said it, that slow, steady tone with a side of "try me," yeah, she meant every syllable. Sabrina, meanwhile, was unraveling. You could see it in the twitch of her fingers gripping the stem of her wine glass. "Oh, come on," she said, laughing that forced laugh women do when they realize they've lost the room. "It was a joke. You guys are taking this way too seriously." Trish shrugged. "I don't joke about good taste." Oof. Direct hit. You could feel the air leave Sabrina's body like she'd been hit with a dodgeball of truth. I sipped my beer, savoring it like a man who'd just found emotional vindication in a bottle of Bud Light. "I guess this makes me a hot commodity," I said. "Guess all that low ambition finally paid off." Paul elbowed me. "Man, you better patent that line before someone else steals it." Sabrina looked ready to throw the grill at both of us. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, but still smiled, because image was everything to her. God forbid the suburban gossip mill think we were anything but the picture of backyard perfection. "Oh, I think it's hilarious," I said, keeping my tone calm and casual, the verbal equivalent of leaning on a car while it explodes in the background. "You make the joke, I get the offer, everybody wins." That line earned a few nervous chuckles, mostly from the men who were trying to memorize it for future use. But Sabrina didn't laugh. She just stood there, holding that wine glass like it contained the last drop of her dignity. Her jaw clenched, and she gave Trish the kind of glare that could melt vinyl siding. Trish didn't flinch. "Don't look at me like that, Sabrina. You were the one who started the trade." Sabrina muttered something that sounded like unbelievable, but it was hard to hear over the sound of me dying inside and trying not to show it. Someone finally tried to change the subject. Bless them. These burgers are really good," they said, with the desperate cheer of a kindergarten teacher trying to redirect a brawl. I smiled. "Thanks. Marinated them overnight." Goes great with marital tension. More laughter, this time real, but still laced with discomfort. At this point, people were laughing not because it was funny, but because it was safer than silence. As for me, I wasn't even mad. Not yet, anyway. I'd spent years being the easygoing husband, the guy who rolled with the jokes, the one who let Sabrina's sarcasm slide because that's what chill husbands do. But something shifted in that moment. Watching her face fall, watching everyone realize that maybe, just maybe, she'd gone too far this time. That felt like the tiniest sliver of justice. The backyard was a battlefield disguised as a barbecue. You could practically hear the neighborhood group chat forming in real time. Did you see what happened at the Miller's barbecue? OMG, Trish said she'd take him. Is Sabrina okay? Spoiler, she was not. As people started packing up their kids and half-empty plates, the energy was weird. Every, thanks for having us, was laced with the unspoken, we'll definitely be talking about this later. Even the dog looked nervous. When the last guest finally escaped, I turned off the grill and leaned against the counter, feeling the cool evening air brush against my neck. The yard was quiet again, the kind of quiet that's not peace, but aftermath. Sabrina stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of what she'd said had finally caught up. You embarrassed me, she said flatly. I almost laughed. You're welcome to the club. I've been a member since our second anniversary. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The calm truth was louder than any argument. Maybe next time, I said. Try not putting your husband on Craigslist. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no words came out. For the first time in forever, she was speechless. I took that as my cue to grab a beer, clink it against the counter like a toast, and walk inside. That night, I fell asleep in the guest room. Not out of anger. Out of choice. The sheets were cool, the AC was on full blast, and for the first time in years, I wasn't lying next to someone who thought I was the punchline. And damn, that sleep hit different. When the last burger was eaten and the crowd scattered faster than a tax seminar, the backyard looked like the crime scene of a social experiment gone horribly wrong. Solo cups tipped over like fallen soldiers, paper plates stuck to the grass, and the faint smell of burnt ego hung in the air. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started up, probably some neighbor trying to drown out the memory of my wife putting me on clearance in front of half the zip code. Sabrina and I stood there in the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage of fun. She was collecting plates with that tight, passive-aggressive precision that says I'm mad, but I still care what people think. I was at the grill, poking the coals even though they were dead, because it gave me something to do other than look at her. Finally, she broke the silence. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I turned slowly, spatula still in hand like a knight holding his sword. Oh really? You're welcome to the club. I've been a member for 8 years. Her face turned the color of overripe tomatoes. Don't start. Oh, I didn't start, I said, flipping an imaginary burger. You did, remember? Right between who wants to trade my husband. And he's low maintenance and has no ambition. She glared at me like I was the problem. You could have backed me up. I laughed. One of those dry, hollow laughs that feels like it's coming from your soul's basement. Backed you up? I was too busy being traded. Kind of hard to multitask when you're on the auction block. You're being ridiculous. And you're right, ridiculous enough to stop being the punchline at my own barbecue. For a second, she looked like she was about to cry. Then she blinked it away, chin high, voice trembling with what she probably thought was righteous indignation. I was just trying to be funny. Everyone jokes about their spouses. Yeah, I said, leaning back against the counter. Except most people don't treat marriage like open mic night. That one landed. I could see it in her eyes, that flash of guilt she tried to bury under a layer of annoyance. But the thing about words is, once they're out, they don't go back in. They just hang there, echoing, taunting. She threw a handful of plastic forks into the trash bag like she was punishing them. You're so sensitive lately. Sensitive? I raised an eyebrow. I'm not sensitive. I'm just done pretending disrespect is cute. She didn't answer, just kept cleaning, her movements sharp, mechanical. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, more like the prelude to a storm you can smell but can't see yet. I walked past her, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and sat on the patio chair that still had the imprint of my humiliation on it. The sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the yard. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think about everything you've ignored for way too long. The truth? That moment at the barbecue wasn't the first time Sabrina had thrown a verbal dart at my back. It was just the first time she'd missed the laughter she expected. Usually, her friends would cackle, I'd laugh along, and we'd pretend it was harmless. But tonight, the crowd didn't laugh with her, they laughed at her. And she felt it. I could see it all over her face. The shock, the embarrassment, the realization that maybe her comedy routine had finally bombed. When she came inside, she didn't say another word. Just slammed the sliding door shut behind her like punctuation. The sound echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls, wrapping around my chest like a dare. I followed her in after a few minutes, still holding my beer, still calm. If I've learned anything about arguments, it's this. Whoever stays calm holds the remote control. She was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, the kind of posture that says, I'm ready to rewrite history. You made me look bad, she said. I leaned against the doorway. Correction, you made you look bad. I just gave it subtitles. She frowned. Do you have to turn everything into a joke? Do you have to turn me into one? That one hit harder than I expected. Her eyes softened for half a second before she masked it with frustration. I don't know what you want from me, Mason. I want you to stop treating me like I'm the comic relief in your highlight reel. I said. You want to play queen of the gossip table? Fine. But don't do it at my expense. She scoffed. You're overreacting, right? Because public humiliation is just fun banter. My bad. She rolled her eyes. You're making it sound worse than it was. I took a sip of beer and smiled. That slow, tired kind of smile that comes after you finally stop lying to yourself. You know? That's what you're good at. Minimizing things. My feelings, my effort, my damn existence. Everything's either an exaggeration or a joke. She froze, caught off guard. I didn't yell. I didn't even sound angry. And maybe that's what scared her more. That calm, matter-of-fact tone that meant I wasn't bluffing anymore. I've spent years trying to be the guy who laughs it off, I said. The one who takes the hit so you can keep being the fun one. But you know what? I'm tired of being the setup for your punchlines. She opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. That silence. It was new, and it felt good. I walked past her, set my beer down, and started heading toward the guest room. Where are you going? She asked, voice cracking. To get some sleep, I said without turning around. Don't worry. I'll leave the spotlight on in case you want to keep performing. She gasped. Not dramatic, not loud. Just that little sound people make when they realize the script flipped without them noticing. I shut the door to the guest room, exhaled, and sat on the bed. The sheets were cool, the air conditioner humming like a lullaby for the emotionally exhausted. For the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't frustration or resentment. It was peace. Lying there, I thought about all the little digs, the jokes that always ended with, I'm kidding, babe. The subtle eye rolls when I talked about my work. The way she'd hijack conversations just to remind people I wasn't as ambitious as her friends' husbands. It all added up. Little cuts that never healed because she kept reopening them with a smile. And maybe that's what made that night different. Because when Trish joked about taking me, I saw something in her tone, not just mischief, but recognition. Like she'd been in my shoes once. The partner who kept quiet while their spouse turned love into a roast session. I laughed quietly to myself, not out of joy but relief. The kind that comes when you finally realize you're not crazy for wanting respect. The irony? For all her talk about me having no ambition, that night I finally found some. Not the career kind, the self-respect kind. I rolled over, stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow and steady, and whispered, never again. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept. Really slept. Like a man who'd finally stopped auditioning for someone else's approval. And let me tell you, that kind of sleep, that's freedom in its purest form. I woke up to the smell of bacon the way some people wake up to a motivational speech. Hopeful, confused, and suspicious that someone is trying to sell them something. The guest room's AC had me cocooned like a human burrito, but bacon is bacon, and I'm only so strong. I rolled out of bed and shuffled down the hall, wearing last night's t-shirt and the kind of face you get when you dream of peace and awaken to the possibility of a trap. The kitchen was staged like a commercial where people pretend breakfast is a love language. Sabrina had gone full production design. Pancakes stacked like architecture, eggs fluffed within an inch of their lives, strawberries fanned out on a plate like they were auditioning for The Bachelor, and a little vase with 2 daisies that had definitely not lived here yesterday. And there, center stage, my wife, hair curled, lipstick flawless, brows razor sharp, smiling like a redemption arc had crawled out of YouTube and asked for a ring. "Good morning, honey," she sang, hitting that bright, airy tone people use when they've done something bad and decorated over it. I poured coffee slowly, letting the smell of roasted beans play defense for my sanity. "Smells like guilt," I said, "because if words are free you might as well buy your freedom with them." She tilted her head like a catalog model. "It smells like bacon sweetened with an apology." I took a sip and nodded at the pancake tower. "Neat. Did Publix deliver the remorse pre-sliced?" She didn't flinch, which meant she'd been practicing that face in the bathroom mirror. "I wanted to do something nice." Last night you wanted to do stand-up?" I said, sliding into a chair. She placed a plate in front of me like it was a bribe with syrup. "Eat first, argue later," she tried. The fork was halfway to my mouth when the doorbell rang. Ding-dong, 2 syllables that said, "Of course this is happening." Sabrina's smile twitched. "Who is that at?" I was already walking. The front door swung open to reveal our divorced neighbor, Trish, in cropped jeans and a t-shirt that said "Coffee is my alibi," holding a big ceramic mug and an expression that dared the morning to try her. "Morning," she said, breezy as a lake house. I ran out of sugar. Of course she did. Sunday mornings in suburbia run on lies and sugar. I stepped aside, and Trish slid in with the efficiency of a person who's been here before, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time. Sabrina appeared in the doorway to the kitchen wearing the kind of smile you see on stepmothers in fairy tales right before they sell you to a witch. "What a surprise," she said, tone so sweet you could hear the cavities forming. Trish lifted her mug, the rim lipsticked in a red that didn't apologize for itself. "Don't worry, I just need a little sweetness to start my day." "Good luck finding any here," I muttered, because I am only human and this is America. The tension thickened instantly. Not a normal thick, like cheesecake thick. So dense the syrup on the pancakes actually hesitated when I poured it, as if it were thinking, "Nope, not going down with this ship." Trish leaned against the counter and surveyed Sabrina's breakfast spread with a low whistle. "Wow, you two expecting the mayor? Or is this a peace treaty disguised as carbs?" I coughed into my mug to hide the smile. Sabrina glided to the stove like she was being judged on posture. "I'm being a good wife," she said lightly, the words performing push-ups for Instagram. "Isn't that what everyone wanted?" "Everyone?" Trish asked, eyebrows doing gymnastics. "Or just the audience you lost last night?" Sabrina's jaw tightened at a speed I felt in my soul. "Sugar's in the pantry," I said quickly, and Trish gave me a little nod. An acknowledgement. Not thanks. We weren't doing thanks yet. She stepped into the pantry while Sabrina spooned eggs onto my plate like I'd asked for them, which I hadn't, because the only thing I asked for recently was respect, and that was apparently on backorder. "So," Sabrina said, placing a towel on the oven handle with surgical care, "how'd you sleep?" "Like a man who wasn't the punchline," I said. She inhaled through her nose, the way people do when they're counting the exits. "I'm trying here." "You're staging," I corrected. "Trying is honest. Staging is when you put fake books on a shelf because you think buyers are literate." Trish emerged with a canister of sugar and a look that said she'd wandered into a live taping. "Found it. Thanks," she said, popping the lid and scooping 2 spoonfuls into her mug. Then she slid onto a stool at the island like it had her name on it. "Don't mind me." The words any person says before absolutely minding everything. Sabrina's smile could have cracked porcelain. "Actually, we were in the middle of breakfast, and I interrupted, am in the middle of coffee, which requires sugar, which she borrowed, which means she's part of the supply chain. Let the woman sit." Trish raised her mug in a little toast. "To logistics." Sabrina's smile recalculated, and she went for polite conversational homicide. "So, Trish, big plans today? Cat yoga? Jeep parade? More volunteering?" Trish grinned. "Nope. Just laundry and watching my neighbor recover from being auctioned in his own backyard." I almost choked on my coffee. Sabrina's eyes flashed. It was a joke. Trish took a slow sip, studied her mug like it had wisdom in it, and then used my own line from last night without mercy. Was it funny? The kitchen blinked. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed like a nervous witness. Sabrina looked at me like I'd invited a prosecutor into our breakfast. I apologized, she said to the air. With food. Trish set the mug down gently, the way you put a glass near a grenade. I don't know, Sabrina. Feels like you're trying to buy back the scene, not change the script. And you, Sabrina snapped, are trying to steal him. Steal what? Trish asked, eyes calm but sharp. A man you priced at low ambition next to the coleslaw? I whistled this time. Couldn't help it. The line was clean. Sabrina ignored me. You don't get to talk about our marriage. You made it public, Trish replied, not unkind, just accurate. Front row seats, free tickets, cash bar. I pushed my plate away and folded my hands because breakfast had turned into court and apparently I was the exhibit. Look, I said, keeping my voice even. Everybody's got their truth. Mine is simple. I want respect with my eggs. Trish gave me an approving half smile. Sabrina's mouth flattened, the steam rising off her composure. I respect you, she said, and the way she said it made the daisies in the vase look away. Okay, I said. Prove it in sentences that aren't jokes. I made breakfast, she repeated, louder, like volume is evidence. Trish tilted her head. You know, he pays the bills, keeps the lawn tight, cooks a better burger than a food truck, and somehow you manage to make all that sound like no ambition. That's a wild magic trick. Sabrina's nostrils flared. Stay out of our business. Trish's smile dropped a fraction. You put him on sale, Sabrina. The neighborhood didn't ask for the flyer. I stood, picked up my plate, and set it in the sink. The morning sun threw a warm stripe across the countertop, dust motes floating like confetti that forgot how to celebrate. I felt weirdly calm, like a lifeguard who's already blown the whistle and now just needs everyone to walk to the shallow end. Here's where I'm at, I said, turning to Sabrina. You can't roast me in front of your fan club and then think pancakes are an apology. You want to fix it? Start with words. Start with not calling me low maintenance, like I'm an air plant you barely water. I called you low maintenance because you are easy, she said, wincing the second the words left her mouth. Easy to love, I offered, trying to hand her a lifeline. Easy to be around. Easy as in dependable. She looked at the floor. Fine. Yes. That. Trish swirled her coffee. Honest question, Sabrina, are you between jobs or retired from self-awareness? Sabrina's head snapped up. I'm between opportunities. For 18 months. I added, because the number lived rent-free in my frontal lobe. Trish's eyebrows hopped like they'd been given caffeine. So he's been footing the bills, keeping the grill hot, and getting roasted for being reliable. That tracks. Sabrina pointed her spoon at us like a wand that only cast bad spells. He's not perfect. Correct, I said. I leave socks in dumb places, and I buy gadgets we don't need. But I also show up. I don't belittle you to get laughs. The anger in her eyes softened into something else. Fear, maybe, or the exhaustion of realizing your favorite trick stopped working. She set the spoon down carefully. I was wrong last night, she said, voice quieter. And I don't know why I kept doing that, turning everything into a bit. I nodded, because progress doesn't need applause, just daylight. Because it made you feel powerful, Trish said, straightforward as a seatbelt click. Sabrina blinked, and for a second I thought she might actually cry. It would have been human, and maybe helpful, but she swallowed it back. Old habits like their corner office. I thought it was harmless, she said. It wasn't. The words came out steady, not cruel. I turned to the sink, ran water over my plate, watched the syrup ribbon down the drain like a metaphor that paid taxes. Behind me, the women were silent, the kind of silence that happens right after surgery when everyone waits to see if the patient breathes on their own. The doorbell dinged again, because when you think you've reached your daily quota of chaos, life throws in a bonus. This time it was Paul, holding a Tupperware of potato salad like a diplomatic offering. Hey, I think this was Carla's, he said, then clocked the room. Oh, y'all doing morning therapy? Grab a stool, Trish said, and I snorted. Nope, Paul blurted, backing away like the floor was lava. I'm allergic to tension before noon. He set the Tupperware down and fled, proving once again that men will run from feelings faster than they run a 5K. I dried my hands and looked at Sabrina. So here's the deal. Respect or silence. Those are the only two ways my name gets used in public from now on. Pick one. She nodded, small, like a kid returning stolen gum. Okay. It wasn't grand, but it wasn't nothing. I can work with okay. Trish slid off the stool and tapped the sugar lid shut. Well, I got what I came for, she said. Sabrina's eyes flared again. Sugar. Clarity. Trish answered, then winked at me with so little heat it registered more as solidarity than flirting. But also sugar. She headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Sabrina, this would have been a lot easier last night if you'd said the two magic words. I'm sorry, Sabrina offered. Thank you, Trish said, jerking a thumb at me. Because the man grilled like a saint while you were workshopping insults. She left on that, breezy and brutal, and the quiet she took with her felt cleaner, like someone finally opened a window. I stood there, hands on the cool countertop, the kitchen smelling like bacon, coffee, and second chances sold at market price. Sabrina turned to the sink, rinsed a plate, and said without looking up, I'm sorry. Real this time. No garnish. I nodded once. Thank you. She swallowed. Do you want more pancakes? No, I said, sliding my mug toward the edge. I want to try again with sentences that don't put me on sale. She nodded, wiped the counter in small circles, and didn't argue. Outside, a bird started up with some perky little melody that would have annoyed me yesterday, but today sounded like a reset. I took my coffee to the back step and sat down, the wood warm under my palms, morning light spilling across the yard like it had never seen a scandal. Behind me, I heard dishes clink and water run and no performance at all, just a normal morning trying to grow out of a loud night. After a minute, Sabrina joined me, sitting far enough to be polite, but close enough to be intentional. We didn't talk. Didn't need to. The silence wasn't a contest anymore. It was a space. And for the first time in forever, I felt like breakfast might actually be the start of a day instead of the aftermath of one. If there's one thing I've learned about suburban diplomacy, it's this. When someone says, "Can we talk?" before breakfast, what they really mean is prepare to defend yourself. So naturally, when Trish sat down at our kitchen table with a mug of my coffee like she owned stock in the place and said, "So, about that husband trade offer," I knew the universe wasn't done mocking me yet. The air went still. Sabrina froze mid-sip, her coffee cup hovering halfway to her lips like she'd been caught in a still frame of a reality TV meltdown. Her jaw tightened, her smile turned to granite, and she gave Trish the kind of look that said, "How dare you bring up the truth in my house?" It was a joke, Sabrina said finally, the word joke trembling like it was scared to be here. Trish didn't even blink. She tilted her head, smiled just enough to be dangerous, and asked, "Was it funny?" And just like that, my morning turned into an episode of The Real Housewives of Suburbia. I almost choked on my eggs. Sabrina's eyes snapped to me, like I was supposed to be the referee in this emotional steel cage match. Nope, not today. I was just the guy with the spatula and a ringside seat. Trish leaned back in her chair, cool and collected, swirling her coffee like a villain monologuing in Act 2. You know, I've been thinking about that trade offer, she said. He seems pretty happy for a low-ambition guy. He makes good coffee, too. That counts as ambition in my book. I grinned into my plate, pretending to focus on my bacon. I try. Sabrina set her mug down a little too hard, the sound sharp enough to make even the syrup pause mid-pour. You don't have to entertain her, she snapped. Trish shrugged. Oh, I'm just giving compliments where they're due. Can't help it if some people don't appreciate what they've got. Some people? Sabrina repeated, her tone climbing an octave like it was training for opera. You mean me? Trish smiled sweetly. If the wine glass fits. Now, for the record, I'm not proud of this, but I sat there eating pancakes like I was watching live theater. I didn't start it. I didn't want it. But God help me, I wasn't about to stop it either. Sabrina crossed her arms. I don't know what you're trying to pull, but you can stop acting like you care. Trish's smile sharpened. Oh, I care. I care about people being treated right. Especially good guys who spend years paying mortgages, fixing leaky faucets, and grilling steaks for women who treat them like background noise. You could feel the temperature in the room spike. I swear the butter on the table started sweating. Then Trish dropped the real grenade. By the way, Sabrina, you still between jobs? Sabrina stiffened. I'm between opportunities. Trish arched a brow. For 18 months. I swallowed a mouthful of coffee and decided to commit social suicide. She's been between opportunities so long. I think the opportunities filed for a restraining order. Trish burst out laughing. Sabrina didn't. She turned that laser glare on me, the one that's melted stronger men. Not helping, she hissed. Hey, I'm just following the plot, I said, leaning back. Apparently, I'm the unambitious husband, so I'm just keeping my role consistent. Trish smirked. You're the one paying the bills, right? Yep. And cooking breakfast? Yep. Keeping the lawn clean, fixing the gutters, paying property taxes, and making sure this house doesn't look like an episode of Hoarders? Pretty much. Trish turned to Sabrina. Then maybe low ambition isn't the insult you think it is. Maybe it's code for dependable, stable, grown. Sabrina's lips parted like she was about to unleash a comeback, but none arrived. She looked around the kitchen like she could find dignity behind the toaster. You don't know what you're talking about. Trish shrugged. Maybe not. But I know what I saw last night. A man being humiliated by someone who's supposed to be his partner. That's enough, Sabrina snapped, standing now. Stay out of our business. Trish smiled, unbothered. You made it everyone's business when you put him on sale. I nearly spit out my coffee. That one landed so clean it deserved a slow clap. Sabrina's eyes watered, but not from sadness, from fury. You're jealous, she said. You can't stand seeing someone happy, so you try to ruin it. Trish tilted her head. If you were happy, I wouldn't be ruining anything. I felt that one in my bones. Sabrina turned to me, desperate now. Are you just going to sit there and let her disrespect me in my own house? I set my mug down slowly. You mean like how you disrespected me in our backyard? Her lips trembled. That was a joke. No, that was a broadcast, I said. A live feed of my dignity getting grilled next to the burgers. The kitchen went silent again. Even the refrigerator compressor took a break to see how this played out. Trish stood, brushing crumbs from her jeans. Well, this has been productive, she said with a tone so chipper it made Sabrina twitch. Next time you host brunch, maybe skip the roast. She grabbed her mug and headed for the door. Before leaving, she paused, looked at me, and said, Coffee was great, by the way. You ever open a cafe? I'll invest. Sabrina's jaw dropped. You? Relax, Trish said, smiling. I'm just teasing. See, it's only funny when both people laugh. Then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of espresso and vengeance. Sabrina slumped into her chair, her voice quieter now. She's trying to steal you. I sighed. Steal what exactly? A man you just listed as clearance stock? She's jealous, Sabrina said, her voice rising again, desperate for control. Jealous of what? Your unemployment benefits. That did it. That one hit the target dead center. She froze, eyes wide, lips trembling. You're unbelievable. I'm consistent, I said. You make the jokes. I just learned to tell better ones. She turned away, whispering to herself. You've changed. I shook my head. No, I stopped pretending your version of love was normal. That one hung in the air, heavy and ugly and true. Sabrina didn't respond. She just sat there, staring into her untouched coffee like it might have answers. For a moment, I almost felt bad, not because I'd said too much, but because she finally heard it. I stood up, grabbed my jacket from the chair, and headed toward the door. Where are you going? She asked, voice small. For a walk, I said, before someone else mistakes me for a bargain. Outside, the morning air hit like a reset button. The sun was bright, the street quiet, and somewhere down the block, a kid was laughing, the kind of laugh that didn't know about pride or ego or who said what at dinner parties. I took a deep breath and let it out slow. Because here's the truth they don't put in marriage books. It's not the big betrayals that end things. It's the tiny ones, the jokes that cut too deep, the silence after the punchline. The mornings where the apology smells like bacon but tastes like manipulation. By the time I came back, the dishes were washed, the table cleared, and Sabrina was gone upstairs. On the counter, she'd left a note. Just one line, in that looping handwriting she used when she wanted to sound innocent. I didn't mean to hurt you. I picked it up, read it twice, then folded it in half and tucked it into my back pocket. Not because it meant forgiveness, but because it meant acknowledgement. And that was more than I'd gotten in a long time. I looked around the kitchen, at the empty plates, the half-empty syrup bottle, the mug Trish forgot. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the background character in my own house. I poured one last cup of coffee, black this time, and muttered to myself, well, if this is the fallout, at least it came with breakfast. There's a moment right after someone storms out of your kitchen when the silence feels heavier than the door they slammed. It lingers. You can almost hear it breathing, smug and satisfied, like it just won something. That's the kind of silence I came home to that afternoon. Thick, self-righteous, and wrapped around the scent of burnt toast and wounded pride. Sabrina was on the couch, mascara slightly smudged, wine glass already refilled. That's how I knew this wasn't going to be a calm discussion. If there's wine before noon, there's drama before 2. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and braced for impact. "She's trying to steal you," she shouted before I even made it into the living room. I blinked. "Steal me? What am I, a flat-screen TV?" "I'm serious," she snapped. "Trish wants you." I sighed, rubbing my temple. "Trish wants peace and quiet. She also wants sugar. I think we can safely say I'm not on her grocery list." "You think this is funny?" she asked, slamming her glass down on the coffee table hard enough to make the coasters flinch. "Oh, it's hilarious," I said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Because nothing screams healthy marriage like accusing your neighbor of grand theft husband." "You don't get it," she said, pacing now. "She's jealous. She wants what we have." "What we have?" I repeated. "You mean public humiliation and emotional constipation?" She gasped, offended. "You're unbelievable." "Thank you," I said dryly. "I work hard to be consistent." Sabrina glared. "You're defending her." "No, I'm defending logic. There's a difference. You can't insult me in front of the entire neighborhood and then play the victim when someone else doesn't worship at your brunch table. You're twisting everything." I leaned against the counter, calm as a monk at a drum circle. "No, Sabrina. I'm just finally calling it what it is." She froze mid-step. "And what is it then?" "It's a pattern," I said. "You make me the joke, and I play along so you can feel like the fun one. You take shots, I laugh, you get applause, and I get to be the lovable idiot who never minds being disrespected. It's been your favorite routine since year 2. She didn't move. Her face went blank, the kind of blank that isn't confusion but defense. I'd seen it before. It's what she does when she realizes she's losing an argument she didn't prepare for. Her voice softened. "You're being dramatic." "Yeah," I said, because subtlety didn't work. She crossed her arms, eyes darting toward the TV like she wanted an escape route. "You know what? Fine. You're perfect. Saint Mason, the long-suffering husband." I laughed. "Oh, please. I'm not perfect. But I'm also not the one who turned marriage into a roast battle." Her lip trembled. For a second, I thought maybe, finally, we were going to have a real conversation. But then she grabbed her wine glass again, refilled it like the answer was somewhere at the bottom, and said, "I can't talk to you when you're like this." "When I'm like what?" I asked. "Calm, honest, unamused." She flung her hand dramatically. "When you make me feel like the villain." "Maybe stop doing villain things," I said. "Problem solved." Her voice cracked. "You're cruel." "No," I said, taking a sip of water. "I'm just done letting you treat me like a prop in your comedy routine." She laughed bitterly. "Oh my God, listen to yourself. You sound so self-righteous." I shrugged. "That's what self-awareness sounds like." She sat down hard on the couch, pressing her palms to her forehead like she was trying to hold the headache in. "You used to be easy. You used to just let things go." "Yeah," I said, because I didn't realize letting things go meant letting me go. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional ice clink from her wine glass. The symphony of a marriage past its melody. Then, like clockwork, she went for the nuclear option. "You've changed." I laughed under my breath. "That's the point." "No, you used to be." She stopped, searching for words, for the version of me that used to absorb her barbs with a smile. "You used to be patient." "I used to be silent," I corrected. "There's a difference." She blinked, thrown off by how calm I was. That's the thing about calm. It scares people more than yelling ever could. She wanted fireworks. I gave her ice. "You think you're so much better than me now, don't you?" she asked. I thought about it, then nodded. "A little, yeah." Her mouth fell open. "Unbelievable." "Honest," I said. "And it's not because you're some terrible monster. It's because you don't listen until someone else says the quiet part out loud. Like Trish. She didn't tell me anything new. She just held up a mirror." Sabrina's eyes welled up. "I made a mistake." I tilted my head. "Which one? The joke, the denial, or this argument where you pretend you're the victim?" That got me silence. Long, painful, truth-filled silence. Then came the tears. Not dramatic ones. Just slow, real, exhausted tears that told me she finally understood this wasn't a game anymore. She covered her face, shoulders shaking, and I stood there feeling nothing. No joy, no triumph, no sadness. Just relief. Like someone finally turned the noise down after years of static. After a few minutes, she said quietly, "I don't know why I do it. I wanted people to like me." I sighed. "Sabrina, people already liked you. You didn't need to throw me under the bus to get extra applause." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, smearing mascara like war paint. "You hate me now, don't you?" I sat down on the opposite end of the couch. "No, I just don't like what we became." She sniffled. "Can we fix it?" I thought about it. The years, the digs, the fake smiles at dinner parties, the apologies that came with side dishes. "Maybe," I said. "But not if you keep pretending I'm the problem. You need to rebrand." She stared at me, searching my face for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or the man who used to let everything slide. But that man was gone. Retired. Out of business. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do better." I didn't say anything. Promises mean less than silence until action shows up. By evening, she was curled on the couch, a blanket around her, watching reality TV reruns, the irony not lost on either of us. I sat in my recliner, flipping channels until I landed on Shark Tank. There's something deeply satisfying about watching people pitch their dreams while others tear them apart. It felt poetic. Sabrina sniffled again. "You're really not going to talk to me?" "I'm listening," I said, not looking up. "Talking's what got us here." She let out a shaky laugh, the kind that's half regret, half exhaustion. "You're impossible." "And you're predictable," I said, still watching TV. "But at least we're consistent." By the time the credits rolled, she'd fallen asleep. Wine glass still on the table, TV light flickering across her face. I turned down the volume, covered her with the blanket, and stood there for a long minute. Because here's the thing about love. Sometimes it doesn't die in one big, cinematic explosion. Sometimes it fades like the battery in a remote, one click at a time, until you realize nothing's changing the channel anymore. I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. Maybe that's growth. Maybe that's fatigue. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Before bed, I checked my phone. A text from Trish popped up. "How's the morning after tour? Need a drink later?" I stared at it for a second, then typed back. "No drinks. Just peace." She sent a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. Perfect. As I climbed into bed, the guest bed again, my chosen fortress, I heard Sabrina stirring downstairs. The faint sound of a sniffle, a sigh, the muted creak of regret. But I didn't move, didn't rush to comfort, didn't play the part. For once, I let the silence speak for me. And damn, it said everything I needed. There are few things more suspicious than waking up to the sound of paper flipping in a quiet house. That soft, rhythmic turning, like guilt in paperback form. When I opened my eyes that morning, sunlight was sneaking through the blinds, and there she was, Sabrina, sitting at the foot of the bed with a notebook. Not her phone, not a tablet, a notebook. The analog guilt machine itself. She looked like a student who'd stayed up all night cramming for the exam she never studied for. Hair messy, still in her robe, and holding a pen like it was both a weapon and a peace offering. I squinted at her. "Please tell me you're not writing a tell-all memoir called Married to a Man Without Ambition. Because I might sue for royalties." She gave me a look, the tight-lipped, "Don't start look." "It's a list," she said softly. I yawned. "Of what? Your enemies?" "Because I already know I'm on page 1. It's a list of things I appreciate about you." That woke me up faster than caffeine. I sat up, staring at her like she'd just said she joined a monastery. "Oh, and how many pages is that?" "Half." She frowned, flipping the notebook toward me so I could see. Her handwriting. Neat, loopy, too perfect, like she rehearsed sincerity. "You pay bills," she began. "You never cheat. You mow the lawn." I blinked. Wow. So basically, I'm a reliable Roomba with health insurance. Her jaw tightened. "You're twisting my words." "No," I said, leaning back on my elbows. "I'm just reading your list. You appreciate the services, not the person. You listed me like a home maintenance package." She shut the notebook with a sigh. "You're impossible to please." "Correction," I said. I'm impossible to pacify with mediocrity disguised as gratitude. Her shoulders slumped. You always have to make a speech, don't you? Only when I'm awake, I said, and usually after being compared to a riding mower. She rolled her eyes, but there was something softer in her voice now. I was trying to do something good. You're just so self-aware, articulate, handsome, exhausting. I smiled. There it is. She stood up and started pacing, her Olympic event of choice. You're blowing everything out of proportion. I'm trying, okay? I made a list. I'm apologizing. I'm cooking. I'm doing all the things you say you want. Yeah, I said, swinging my legs off the bed. Except the one thing I actually asked for. She frowned. And what's that? Respect. That word hit the air like a grenade with a long fuse. She froze. Her eyes darted between me and the notebook like maybe she could write her way out of this conversation. Finally, she said quietly, I do respect you. I laughed. Not a big laugh, just that single exhale of disbelief you let out when someone tries to convince you the sky's orange. If this is respect, I'd hate to see what mockery looks like. She crossed her arms. I've said I'm sorry, Mason. Yeah, I said, but I don't need an apology. I need evidence. She blinked. Evidence. I nodded. You ever notice how you always say you're sorry, but never act like it? You drop a line, I drop the argument, and then 2 weeks later, same joke, different crowd. It's like Groundhog Day, but instead of a rodent, it's my self-esteem dying of secondhand embarrassment. She sat back down on the bed, quieter now. So what are you saying? I took a deep breath. I'm saying, pack your things. Her head jerked up. What? I stood, running a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of years pressing down like humidity. You heard me. Pack your things. I can't do this anymore. Her mouth fell open. You're kicking me out. I'm freeing us both, I said. You from pretending you're happy, and me from being your favorite prop. She blinked rapidly, trying to process. You're serious. I nodded. Dead serious. I've spent too long trying to make this work while you've been auditioning for the role of funny wife who just can't help roasting her man. Congratulations, you got the part. But I'm done being your co-star. She stared at me like I'd just told her the earth was flat. But, I love you. I turned toward the window, because looking at her felt too heavy. No, I said quietly. You love my free labor. You love the stability I provide, the house, the bills paid, the groceries stocked, the peace you get to ruin at your convenience. But me, I turned back to her. You don't love me. You love the benefits. She stood up, trembling. That's not fair. Neither is being someone's emotional punching bag at every social event. Tears started forming, real ones this time. Please, Mason, don't do this. We can fix it. I shook my head. No, Sabrina. I tried to fix it. You tried to patch it. There's a difference. You can't slap pancakes and posted apologies on top of years of disrespect and call it renovation. Sometimes you gotta tear the whole damn house down. She was crying now, voice cracking. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said. But you did. And meaning doesn't erase damage. Her legs gave a little, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching that stupid notebook like it was a lifeline. What am I supposed to do? Start over, I said simply. Find out who you are when you're not performing. She looked up, eyes red, and whispered, and you? I'm going to remember what peace feels like, I said. Because somewhere along the way, I forgot. The silence that followed wasn't sharp anymore. It was flat, empty, like the aftermath of a storm that finally spent itself. I went to the closet, pulled out her suitcases, and set them on the bed. She watched me, frozen. I opened drawers, started folding her clothes, neatly, methodically. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. She finally stood, voice trembling. You're serious. Serious enough to start laundry before noon, I said. She let out a breath that sounded like defeat. You'll regret this, she whispered. I smiled softly. Maybe, but at least it'll be my decision to regret. She didn't argue after that. Just sat there, watching me fold the last of her blouses. For once, she didn't have a clever line or a sarcastic jab. And I realized she didn't know how to exist without them. When I zipped the last suitcase, the sound echoed through the room like punctuation. There, I said, stepping back. Your things are ready. She looked up at me, eyes wide. Raw? You're really done, aren't you? Yeah, I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. I think I stopped being your husband the moment you put me up for trade. I'm just catching up now. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I nodded toward the suitcases. That's the problem, Sabrina. You never think I'll do anything. You assume I'll stay, smile, swallow it all, and reset tomorrow. But this time, tomorrow's mine. She sat there in silence, eyes following me as I picked up my phone and wallet from the nightstand. I hope you find someone who laughs at your jokes, I said softly. And I hope next time, you remember the punchline's supposed to make people laugh, not hurt. Then I walked out. Halfway down the stairs, I heard her sob. Deep, breaking, human. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't even sad. It was just real. And maybe that's all either of us had left. When I reached the bottom, I looked around the house. At the kitchen we fought in, the table we performed at, the couch that knew more secrets than it should have. And I thought, maybe love doesn't die loud. Maybe it just fades quietly into the background, waiting for someone brave enough to notice. I grabbed my keys, opened the door, and stepped outside into the sunlight. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel traded. I felt free. Folding someone's clothes into a suitcase feels weirdly ceremonial. There's a rhythm to it. Not the tender kind, like packing for a vacation, but the quiet, methodical kind you use when you've decided peace is more important than pretending. That's what I told myself as I zipped the final bag shut, the sound slicing through the air like a verdict. Sabrina was still standing by the dresser, arms crossed, eyes red but defiant. She'd gone through all 5 stages of grief in the last 2 hours, sometimes twice. Denial? Check. Anger? She threw a pillow. Bargaining. Promised to change. Depression? The silent tears. Acceptance? Well, we weren't there yet, but she was getting closer. You can't just kick me out, she said again, her voice trembling between heartbreak and entitlement. I took a breath, steady. Sabrina, I'm not kicking you out. I'm setting you free. There's a difference. Don't give me your therapist voice, she snapped. You're not the calm one here, Mason. You're done. I offered. Yeah, I know. She glared, eyes wet but sharp. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, I said, picking up one of the suitcases. Just a man who finally figured out that self-respect isn't negotiable. She watched me carry the bag toward the door like it was the last scene of a movie she didn't want to end. Where will I go? She asked finally, her voice cracking. Try Indeed.com, I said without missing a beat. That one landed. She flinched like the words had weight, and maybe they did. Because here's the thing. When you've been the emotional janitor in your own marriage, cleaning up every mess your partner makes, you eventually run out of mops. I opened the front door, sunlight spilling into the living room like an unwanted witness. I set the suitcases down neatly by the mat, dusted my hands, and turned back toward her. There, I said. Stage is yours. Her face twisted, the pain shifting into anger. This is Trish's fault, she hissed. She's been trying to get between us for months. Right on cue, like the universe was tired of subtlety, Trish appeared outside watering her plants. Denim shorts, tank top, hair tied back. She looked like peace-wearing sneakers. She caught sight of us through the open door and waved cheerfully, hose in one hand, cup of coffee in the other. Morning, neighbor, she called. Perfect timing, I muttered. Sabrina's head whipped around. Don't you dare. But Trish was already leaning against the fence, smiling like she'd been waiting for this scene her whole life. Need a hand with those bags? She asked sweetly. Sabrina pointed at her, face red. You? This is all your fault. Trish raised an eyebrow. Technically, you offered the trade. I just raised my hand. Mic drop. Sabrina's jaw dropped, then slammed shut. You're disgusting, she spat. Trish sipped her coffee calmly. Maybe, but I'm not unemployed and mean before breakfast. I coughed into my fist, mostly to stop myself from laughing. It didn't work. A small, traitorous chuckle escaped. Sabrina turned on me. You think this is funny? A little, I admitted. Not the situation, just the delivery. Her hands flew up. I can't believe this. You're actually siding with her. I'm not siding with anyone, I said. I'm just acknowledging good comedic timing when I hear it. Sabrina grabbed one of the smaller bags, shaking with fury. Fine. If this is what you want, then enjoy your perfect little neighborhood soap opera. Already am, I said, stepping aside so she could pass. She dragged the bag to the car, muttering under her breath. Trish watched from her lawn, arms folded, looking somewhere between satisfied and genuinely sad. Because for all her fire, I think she actually pitted Sabrina. When Sabrina came back for the second suitcase, she shot me a look, one that said, "You'll regret this." I held her gaze. Spoiler alert, I won't. Her lips quivered, but she didn't respond. She just grabbed the handle and stomped out the door. Trish called over. "Hey, at least you're getting some exercise." I closed my eyes. "Trish." "What?" she said, mock innocent. "Encouragement is self-care." Sabrina froze on the walkway, spun around, and pointed at her. "You'll regret this, too." Trish gave her a small, smug smile. "Honey, I already regretted marriage once. I'm good." The air between them crackled, tension thick enough to grill another burger on. Sabrina turned away, yanking open the car trunk like it owed her money. She shoved the bags inside, slammed it shut, and for a brief moment, she looked small. Just a woman who'd built her world on control and finally realized she couldn't hold on to anything anymore. She got into the car, started the engine, and stared straight ahead. "You're going to miss me," she said through the open window. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I already do," I said quietly. "But not the version you've been lately." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward me for half a second, just long enough for me to see the flash of regret. Then she pulled out of the driveway and sped off, taillights cutting through the calm like punctuation at the end of a long, loud sentence. Silence fell again, this time lighter, almost warm. Trish set her coffee down and walked over, still holding the hose. "Well," she said, nodding toward the empty driveway. "That escalated quickly." "You think?" I said, rubbing the back of my neck. She grinned. "You handled it better than most men would have. If it were me, I'd have thrown her clothes out the window like confetti." I considered it, I admitted. "But I'm too old to start explaining things to cops." Trish laughed, a real one, not the tight, polite kind people use at cookouts. "So what now? You gonna celebrate your freedom, or just stand here looking like a Hallmark movie in reverse?" "I'm leaning toward both," I said. She smirked. "I've got beer and leftover pizza if you need emotional support." I chuckled. "You offering therapy or temptation? Depends on what time you show up." I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "You're relentless." She shrugged. "What can I say? Divorce gives you hobbies." For a moment, we just stood there, neighbors, survivors, maybe a little broken but unashamed of it. There was no flirting, no tension, just understanding. The kind you can't fake. After a beat, I asked, "Do you think she'll be okay?" Trish looked down the road, where Sabrina's car had vanished. "Eventually," she said, "but she's gonna have to face herself first. And that's harder than losing a husband." I nodded. "Yeah, been there." Trish handed me her hose. "Here, you look like a man who needs to clean something." I laughed. "What, like repentance?" "Like the driveway," she said. "It's covered in drama." She walked back toward her house, leaving me standing there, holding a green garden hose like it was a metaphor for starting over. I turned on the water and let it run, the stream hissing against the pavement, washing away little patches of dust and spilled emotions. The longer I stood there, the lighter I felt. Not happy exactly, but empty in a good way, like a cluttered room finally cleaned out. After a while, Trish called over from her porch. "You know, you could have done a lot worse than me." I laughed. "Is that your way of saying you accept the trade?" She winked. "I'm saying I don't reject it." I shook my head. "You're impossible. And you're free," she called back. "Don't waste it." When the water finally stopped, I coiled the hose, leaned against the porch post, and looked out at the quiet street. The same cul-de-sac where I'd grilled burgers, smiled through humiliation, and realized what self-worth actually tasted like. It wasn't steak. It was silence. Sabrina was gone. The house felt bigger, emptier, but not lonely. Just waiting, like a place that could finally breathe again. I looked down at the faint damp streaks on the driveway where her car had been and said to no one in particular, "Guess I'll call that spot closure." Then I walked back inside, locked the door, and exhaled, not in sadness, not in victory, just relief. And damn, it felt good. 3 weeks after Sabrina drove off with her suitcases and leftover resentment, I decided to fire up the grill again. Same backyard, same faded lawn chairs, same slightly dented cooler that had seen more emotional breakdowns than tailgates. But the vibe? Oh, the vibe had changed. This time, there was no tension in the air, no passive-aggressive playlist of women with something to prove blasting from the Bluetooth speaker. The sun was warm, The sky was clear, and I swear even the mosquitoes seemed less judgmental. It felt like hitting reset on life. I'd cleaned up the yard earlier that morning, trimmed the grass, wiped down the patio table, even threw out that burnt spatula Sabrina swore was seasoned. I wanted everything fresh. New era, new energy, same man, just slightly better marinated. Around noon, Trish came over. Of course she did. If there's one thing you can count on in the suburbs, it's that divorced neighbors can smell a grill lighting up faster than raccoons smell trash. She strolled in through the gate like she owned stock in the place, holding a tray of sliced tomatoes and laughing to herself. "You really did it," she said. "You brought back the neighborhood barbecue. You're braver than I thought." I smirked. "Well, the trauma fades faster when you replace it with brisket." "Fair point," she said, setting down the tray. "Half the wives think I'm evil, by the way. And the other half," I asked, "think I'm their spirit animal." We both laughed. The grill hissed, smoke curling up like a peace offering to the gods of redemption. There's something therapeutic about grilling after emotional chaos. The sizzle feels like closure. The smell of charred meat somehow reminds you that life moves on, that mistakes, like marinades, eventually soak in, lose their bitterness, and turn into flavor. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. She flipped the burger buns. I laid out fresh patties, each one perfectly round, none of them symbolizing disappointment. "So," she said, leaning on the counter, "how's the single life treating you, Mr. Bachelor of the Barbecue?" I chuckled. "Well, I don't have to explain why we're out of oat milk anymore, so that's a plus." "Sleeping better?" "Like a man who isn't being judged by the way he folds towels." She grinned. "You fold towels?" I shrugged. "Now I do. I'm wild like that." She laughed, and for a second, I realized how different that sound was from Sabrina's laughter. Trish laughed with people, not at them. It was free, unforced, and didn't carry that sharp edge that always made me brace for impact. A few neighbors started trickling in. Apparently, word spreads fast when the local scandal turns into an event. Paul and his wife, Carla, came first, pretending they just happened to be passing by. Then the Millers from 2 houses down showed up with chips, and what they claimed was homemade guacamole. It wasn't. I saw the plastic lid. Even old Mrs. Langford brought her dog, who had better social skills than half the HOA. And just like that, the yard was alive again. Chatter, laughter, the clink of bottles, and the soft buzz of suburban gossip dying a natural death. As I was flipping burgers, Paul sidled up next to me, beer in hand. "Man, this feels weirdly peaceful," he said. "Like, I keep waiting for Sabrina to pop out of the bushes and start roasting someone." "She's not invited to this season," I said deadpan. "We rebooted the franchise. Fewer tears, more seasoning." He laughed, raising his bottle. "Amen to that." For once, people were relaxed, genuinely relaxed. No forced smiles, no side-eyeing the host's marriage, no whispered, "Did you hear about?" Energy floating around. Just people eating, drinking, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, we were all allowed to start over. Then, right as I was putting the finishing touches on the ribs, I heard it. That voice I'd once heard every morning, somewhere between a yawn and a complaint. "Mason." The entire yard went silent. It was like someone had pressed pause on the party. Even the dog stopped panting. Sabrina stood at the edge of the lawn, wearing jeans and a Target name tag that said assistant floor manager. Her hair was tied back, makeup minimal, but the confidence that used to drip off her like perfume was gone. She looked real and nervous. Trish's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't move. She stayed next to the cooler, quiet. Everyone else pretended to look at the food like they weren't waiting for the sequel. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped forward, keeping my tone even. "Hey." She swallowed. "Can we talk?" Every instinct screamed not now. But the kind of man who says yes to closure doesn't win awards. He just sleeps better. "Sure," I said. She walked closer, eyes flicking toward Trish, then the grill, then me. "I got a job," she blurted out. "At Target. Full-time." I nodded. "Good for you." "I'm trying," she said quickly. "Really trying. I'm sorry for everything. For the jokes, the way I treated you, all of it. She exhaled shakily. "I didn't realize how much I needed you until you stopped letting me need you." There was a part of me that wanted to say something comforting, something movie-worthy. But reality doesn't come with a soundtrack, and forgiveness doesn't always come with confetti. "I'm glad you're doing better," I said. I really am. She looked around the yard, seeing the easy laughter, the calm faces, the peace she never knew how to sit in. Her lip trembled. You replaced me fast. I almost laughed. Sabrina, I replaced chaos with calm. You just happened to be holding the chaos. She winced, but didn't argue. I made a lot of mistakes. Yeah, I said softly. So did I. Staying too long was one of them. She nodded, tears welling up, but not falling. I hope you're happy. I am, I said. Not perfect, not healed, but happy enough to grill without worrying about emotional landmines. She smiled faintly, the kind that says I get it now, but it's too late. Well, she said, stepping back. I just wanted to say that. I won't bother you again. Take care, Sabrina, I said. She nodded, turned, and walked away, the sound of her footsteps fading under the laughter that slowly started up again. Trish joined me by the grill, voice low. That was surprisingly civil. I'm evolving, I said, flipping a burger. It's either that or therapy, and therapy doesn't come with ribs. She snorted. You sure you're okay? I looked at the smoke rising against the sky. Yeah, for the first time, I think I actually am. She smiled, brushing a crumb off her shirt. Good, because I brought pie, and I'm not taking it home. As the afternoon rolled on, the tension melted away. Laughter returned, stories flowed, and even Paul's terrible playlist somehow hit the right notes. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was just a man, a grill, and a second chance, surrounded by people who'd seen the worst and decided to show up anyway. When the sun dipped low, Trish leaned next to me and whispered, You know, you might have started something here. The comeback cookout. I smiled. Catchy. You should make it an annual thing. Only if you promise not to mention it on the neighborhood Facebook group. I don't need another headline. She laughed. Fine. I'll just tell people it's a support group for emotionally roasted men. Perfect, I said. We'll serve therapy with barbecue sauce. As the last of the guests trickled out, I looked around at the yard, the same space where everything had fallen apart and somehow, everything had stitched itself back together. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine again. When I finally sat down, Trish handed me the last cold beer from the cooler. To peace, she said. To starting over, I replied. We clinked bottles, the sound sharp and satisfying. The grill sizzled one last time, the smoke curling up into the twilight like a quiet thank you. And for once, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. If someone had told me 2 months ago that I'd end up barbecuing in peace, drinking beer with my ex-neighbor, and actually smiling like a man who didn't need therapy coupons, I'd have laughed right in their face. Yet here I was, same house, same grill, same suburban skyline. But somehow, everything was brand new. Life after marriage doesn't hit like a tidal wave. It creeps in like a breeze that smells suspiciously like freedom and lighter fluid. There's no grand soundtrack, no dramatic montage where you grow a beard and rebuild your identity with power tools. It's quieter than that. It's you, a cup of coffee, and the sudden realization that nobody's yelling because you bought the wrong brand of paper towels. Trish had become a constant. Not in a romantic comedy, cue the music kind of way, at least not yet, but in that real, practical, hey, I have extra coffee filters sort of way. She popped in, dropped off muffins, occasionally borrowed sugar again. I was convinced she had a stockpile by now, and slowly turned my once chaotic mornings into something resembling human life. It wasn't about replacement. It was about recovery. One evening, a week after the comeback cookout, she showed up holding a bottle of wine and that smirk that usually meant trouble disguised as small talk. You busy? I gestured toward the grill. I'm literally searing my dinner. You know, the sacred ritual of single manhood. She laughed and set the wine down on the patio table. Relax, chef therapy. I'm here for company, not a rescue mission. I poured her a glass, grabbed one for myself, and sat down. The sunset bled orange over the fence, the kind of cinematic backdrop that makes you think maybe the universe doesn't know what it's doing. You seem lighter, she said. I took a sip. Yeah. Guess turning your house into an emotional war zone for years will make you appreciate silence. She leaned back, studying me. You ever think about her? Of course, I said. You don't just delete 8 years of marriage like spam mail. But now, when I think about her, it's like remembering a bad sitcom. You laugh, you cringe, and you're grateful it got canceled before another season. Trish chuckled. I'm stealing that. Go ahead, I said. Consider it community property. She smiled, but there was softness behind it. You know, your ex actually did me a favor. Oh yeah? Which part? The public auction or the emotional fallout? All of it, she said, swirling her wine. Because she gift-wrapped the perfect man and handed him to me. I snorted. Perfect? Me? I forget laundry in the dryer until it smells like disappointment. Sure, she said, laughing. But you also make killer burgers, don't lie to impress people, and your idea of a good time doesn't involve gossip or chaos. You're real. That's rare out here. I stared at her for a second, feeling something shift. Not big, not fireworks, just a quiet click, like the world aligning 1 degree closer to sense. Guess I really was a limited edition model. Exactly, she said, and I managed to snag the last one in stock. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to perform. As the night deepened, we talked about everything: bad dates, worse marriages, her Jeep constantly breaking down, and how she once accidentally joined a pyramid scheme because she thought she was signing up for a yoga class. By the time the bottle was empty, laughter had replaced the kind of silence that used to weigh heavy in this house. It felt easy, effortless. That's the thing nobody tells you about healing. It's not some grand emotional victory. It's small. It's the absence of dread. It's waking up and not checking your phone for damage control. It's cooking for two and realizing you're not nervous about saying the wrong thing. Later that week, I got a text from an unknown number. Heard you upgraded. Good for you. Ryan, Trisha's ex. I showed her the message when she came over that Friday night. She read it, snorted, and rolled her eyes. Oh, him. He still sends me memes about manifesting success. I guess he manifested me leaving. Should I respond? I asked. She grinned. Nah, let silence be your spokesperson. But she did text him back herself while I watched. Upgraded from toxic to terrific. Yeah, I'd say so. Then she tossed her phone on the couch and leaned back, smirking. There. Now it's official. I laughed, shaking my head. You're dangerous. And you like it, she said, eyes glinting. She wasn't wrong. Over the next few weeks, our lives just sort of merged. Not dramatically, not with labels or declarations, but naturally. She brought her cat over because he likes new vibes. I fixed her leaky kitchen faucet because YouTube confidence is a superpower. We swapped playlists, swapped stories, and one night, without any ceremony, swapped toothbrushes. It wasn't romance built on adrenaline or chaos. It was built on peace, which, frankly, is the sexiest thing I'd ever felt. One Saturday afternoon, as I was cleaning the grill, again, apparently trauma makes you neat, she leaned against the fence watching me. You know, she said, you're not the same guy I met. Good different or bad different? I asked. She smiled. You've got this calm now. Like you finally believe you deserve to be happy. I paused, spatula in hand. Yeah, I guess I finally realized I don't have to earn peace by suffering first. She nodded. Took you long enough. I laughed. You sound like my therapist, if my therapist had better legs and made better coffee. Careful, she said. Flattery might get you more chores. We laughed again, but somewhere between the teasing and the sunlight and the smell of grilled perfection, I realized this. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not grand gestures or dramatic speeches. Just comfort. Consistency. Laughter that didn't cost you dignity. When I think back to that first cookout, the trade-offer day, I can't help but smirk. It's poetic in a twisted kind of way. I started that day being auctioned off as low maintenance and unambitious, and somehow, that label turned out to be the best compliment I'd ever received. Turns out, low maintenance just means peaceful. Unambitious means content. And maybe that's the real prize in this mess. Not the win, but the quiet afterward. Later that night, as Trish and I sat on the porch, the air cool and calm, she reached for my hand. You think she ever realized what she lost? I thought about it for a moment. Probably. But by the time people realize the value of calm, they've already burned the bridge that led to it. Trish smiled faintly, resting her head on my shoulder. Well, her loss looks good on me. I chuckled. Yeah, it does. We sat there in silence for a while. Not the kind that fills space awkwardly, but the kind that settles in like an old friend. The crickets chirped. The streetlights flickered on. Somewhere, a car door slammed, followed by laughter. Life went on, and I finally felt like I was part of it again. Before heading in, I looked at her and said, "You know what's crazy? I spent years thinking the best revenge was proving people wrong. And now," she asked, "now I think the best revenge is peace, the kind that doesn't need an audience." She grinned. "That's because you finally grew up. Or maybe I just finally stopped being the punchline," I said. She squeezed my hand. "Same thing." As we went inside, I glanced back at the grill, the same one where everything had started, burned, and somehow come full circle. The coals glowed faintly, stubborn and alive, like they weren't quite ready to die out. Neither was I, because sometimes the trade you didn't see coming ends up being the one that saves your life. And standing there, next to the woman who'd seen me humiliated, rebuilt, and reborn, I couldn't help but think, yeah, the trade was a win.